dignified reception conditions and provide access to diverse services regardless of where the asylum seekers or migrants come from. They are also putting in place innovative and sustainable solutions to ensure the protection of migrants' rights and their integration into local communities. For this reason, in 2019, the Committee of the Regions created the Citizen Regions for Integration of Migrants Network, which serves as a platform to share knowledge and good practices, provide capacity building, and develop current policy approaches towards more effective results. Your project, Whole-COMM, exploring the integration of post-2014 migrants from a whole-of-community perspective, has also demonstrated the crucial role that small and medium-sized towns and rural areas can play in finding solutions to crisis situations and in creating opportunities for inclusive long-term integration. Furthermore, your project's policy recommendations emphasize that integration is a two-way process, a mutual learning and adaptation between newcomers and long-term residents. As we know, successful integration of migrants and refugees at local and regional level can be a win-win process that brings both economic and social benefits, and many local and regional authorities have proven that. Citizen regions are the ones who introduce and put innovative inclusion practices and policies in place that are beneficial to newcomers and local communities and are greatly able to contribute to the successful implementation of national and European inclusion policies. Thanks to these policies and to the efforts of citizen regions, refugees and migrants have become an integral part of many local communities by contributing socially, culturally, and economically. We can see that local and regional administrations not only play a key role in receiving and welcoming newcomers, but also set a benchmark and inspire European authorities and policymakers. Therefore, greater political and financial support from national and European levels is also needed to facilitate and empower local and regional authorities in their work on migrant integrations into the local communities. I think in the next few minutes we will embark on a journey of knowledge sharing and policy exchange on migrants integration approaches. We can see that cities, regions, small municipalities and local communities, practitioners and researchers alike are interested in building more inclusive societies and being keen to exchange with others on the tools and practical ways of achieving this common goal of more inclusive and sustainable integration in societies. Thank you for joining us here today, and I look forward to your exchanges. I wish you a very good conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A great opening to get us started. Now, next, let's have some welcoming remarks from Tiziana Caponio, who is the principal investigator of the Whole-COMM project.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Maybe can you hear me? Yeah, it's working. Especially to the Committee of the Region for hosting this final conference of Whole-COMM, which has been a long, I think, quite long journey. We started in 2021, so still in the pandemic. And we are now today, that's great that we are here in person, and with also the web streaming. So this is great, I think. A great final point that we reached through a lot of encounters with local communities, with researchers in different countries. And, what we have been doing in these years as really to engage with a different perspective on integration that has been the case for a long time. Debates on integration has always been very much focused on the national level, what governments do, how they frame or think of migrants' integration in terms of philosophies, of national philosophies or approaches to integration. We knew already, that migrants are actually scholars living in cities, and that's where integration actually gets concrete, everyday activity. But still, as scholars, probably before the so-called asylum crisis, we were less aware that there are a lot of small localities where this was taking place. And we needed really to go deeper into these. That's what Whole-COMM did, basically, confronting what was happening in small places and that were brought to the fore because of the so-called crisis. Actually, we found out that in many of these localities, migrants were already there. We didn't find anything new in some respects. For instance, in Italy, there are a lot of success stories of migrants in the area of the Parmigiano Reggiano production, for instance, that is done by migrants from the sub-Indian continent. So it's not that migrants arrived in 2015, but what we really were engaged with is to understand how the communities changed because also of in those years around the crisis, because of the perception that the crisis was going on. So we think that since 2015, the presence and the interactions in the small communities could not be overlooked anymore. Before these were there, nobody was paying much attention. There was a lot of economic rationale that make migrants important in these communities, and nobody was really questioning what was going on. But from 2015, we discovered that, new migrants were arriving, and many of these localities had to engage in integration and in also dealing with the challenges of social change in these localities. I don't want to anticipate the results, of course. We are going to see, what we have been producing and working on throughout these 3 years. But let me just, flag 2 key, I think, messages that we can draw from our rich field work. First of all, what we understood from these localities is that there is a need for the whole of community really to get engaged. Maybe we can go to the slide. Yes. You can have an idea of the different communities that we have been working on, so in this map. And the whole of community approach was, the lens we adopted to understand who got involved, how, in which way, and what we really collected from the ground is that the community level really matters. There are different ways that communities were following or pursuing in their attempt to cope with the challenge of new arrivals of migrants at the turn of 2014-2015. But this all of community, the mobilization of the community cannot be given for granted. We had different experiences, and we saw that local governments and politics in these localities is a very important factor that can trigger different reactions to the presence of migrants. We might be thinking, as well as scholars, we have been thinking that, in small localities especially, there is kind of pragmatic approach, also because of the success stories I was mentioning before. We need migrants. Our economy needs this labor force. So we are not discussing that much what integration is. This is going to happen through the labor market and then school. And actually, we found that this is not necessarily the case. There are discussions at the local level. Policies are important, and especially the political climate in a locality is very relevant, and we will hear more from the presentations later on. Also because social interactions in these localities, we found, are still very poor. So, we are we have been doing research in 2021, 2022, and still 6 years after the crisis, the local population was interacting very rarely with the migrants that sometimes were still living in some kind of sheltered accommodation or dedicated places. So social interactions in these localities are still to be strengthened, developed. We did a little, a small, we hope useful for the localities, a small intervention, what we called the community walk. We tried to bring together migrants who arrived and were still accommodated in some of these refugees centers with the local communities to walk through the localities to really get to understand better the story of the locality, the process of social change, and so forth. It was a small experiment that we did in some of the localities, but that tell us that also small things in these localities can matter, because we saw really people starting to interact and to get interested to one another. So I leave it there. Thanks a lot for being here today. Here in this other slide, you can have an idea of the many outputs that we have been producing in the Whole-COMM project, and we really look forward to your reactions, comments, suggestions, and to engage in an interesting conversation today around our project. Thanks a lot to everyone.
Thanks very much, Tiziana. A really key point I think you made there, that so much of the political debate has been focused at the national level, but it's actually regional and municipal authorities who have to grapple with a lot of these issues, as you described. So that's why I think today's event is so important. So I want to thank Emmanuel and Tiziana, both of you, for your opening remarks. So you guys can go ahead and take a seat, and I'd like to call up the next four panelists for the next section, which is towards more robust and effective policy responses to migrant integration in European small localities. So first, we're going to get a presentation of the Whole-COMM results, along with policy recommendations and strategy paper for what to do with those results, how policymakers can take what the project has learned and actually make new policy out of it. So I would like to introduce, to present the Whole-COMM results, Andrea Petruccin, who is from the Collegio Carlo Alberto, and Irene Ponzo from the International and European Forum on Migration. We're just going to pull up. We got the slides ready? Okay, so Andrea, I turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm very happy to present today some insights from our final Whole-COMM policy brief, which is titled Towards More Robust and Effective Policy Responses to Migrant Integration in Small and Medium-Sized Towns and Rural Areas in the EU, Lessons Learned from the Whole-COMM project. So this is the structure of our policy brief and also of my presentation today. So we decided to focus on one of the policy problems that powerfully emerged from the Whole-COMM project, which is the lack of robust and effective policy responses in the field of migrant integration in small localities. So in the first presentation, I will outline what we found, and then I will try to identify some key obstacles that emerged from our research and that we suggest are contributing to prevent the development of such inclusive measures. And finally, we'll move to some recommendations. So starting from the overall policy problem that we address in this policy brief, we really found that in most of the 49 small localities that we have analyzed in our project, there were, first of all, very underdeveloped inclusion policies. So just to give you some examples, we found that, almost, or very, very few of our localities we analyzed had an integration strategy in place. Most of them didn't have any body responsible for migrant integration, very often not even a local official, particularly in rural areas, working on migrant integration. And we also found that measures in very important areas, housing, education, social inclusion, were really highly fragmented. as you can also see from this overview and this table in the slide. And on the other hand, we also found that relations between local governments of these localities and other key actors involved in integration governance, so non-public actors on the one hand, and also governments at higher governmental levels on the other hand, are very segmented and often conflictual. So why is this a problem? Why are more robust and effective responses in these localities needed? Well, there are various reasons. Just to mention some reasons, reasons that, again, emerged powerfully from our project. First, as Tiziana already mentioned, we really observed a very, very limited social interactions between locals and refugees taking place in our localities. You can also see here results of one question that was included in a large survey we conducted with local residents that really touches upon this issue of social interactions. We will hear more also in the second session about this. A second important reason, we really observed a widespread housing crisis in most of the localities we analyzed, and especially in the small localities where access to employment was easier. A third important and maybe broader reason, again, in this large survey, what emerged was a widespread perception by the public that refugees are not well integrated. So all these reasons really call for more inclusive measures at the local level. So in the second part of the policy brief, we identify a number of factors that we think are really obstructing, preventing the development of more inclusive responses. The first one is certainly not surprising, and it's related to the lack of capacity, funding, expertise, and resources in many of these small localities. As I told you before, in most of these localities, there is not even a body or a local official or an elected policymaker who has responsibility for migrant integration. Second important point is really related to the isolation of local governments of small localities from multi-level governance structures and venues. So we collected a lot of data about interactions related to immigrant integration between local governments and other actors, and what came out is really that they have, in most of, I would say almost all of our localities, almost no interaction with EU level, extremely rare interactions with the national level, and rather rare interactions also at the regional level. We also observe that localities have almost no interaction among themselves, even within the same country. And this, of course, has powerful consequences also for the possible diffusion of best practices in this field. The third point, and partially related to this, is the limited weight of small localities at the EU level. What really we observed is that funding schemes, policies, instruments at the EU level are really almost and sometimes implicitly targeting big cities, which makes it also hard for small localities to participate and to have access to funding, and so on and so forth. Fourth point, again, something Tiziana has already mentioned. I think what really came out of many of the analyses we've conducted is an important role of a growing politicization of integration policymaking in small localities. So until a few years ago, also in academic debates on migrant integration, there was this idea that integration policymaking at the local level, and especially in small localities, was characterized by these kind of pragmatic approaches, that it was largely apolitical, while instead we found that policies, governance relations, even actions of non-public actors are powerfully influenced by a number of political factors. The local strength of anti-migration parties in local councils, the political affiliation of local governments, also dynamics of multi-level party politics, and so on. So just to give you one example, we interviewed, I think, a high number of local policymakers, and we asked them what are the most important factors that influence your decisions on migrant integration. We provided them with a long list of factors, and the three factors that were mentioned as the most important ones were values and ideas, public opinion, and exchanges with political parties that support local executives, which I think was quite revealing. Fifth, another obstacle we identified is related to the prevalence of what we call assimilationist understandings of migrant integration. among policy actors working in these small localities. So we asked them, we interviewed more than 500 actors in our project together with our partners, and we asked these actors who should be responsible for migrant integration according to you, and more than half of our respondents replied that it is migrants first and foremost who should be responsible for their integration. And again, we think that these understandings have powerful consequences for the actions that are taken also by public institutions in these localities. And finally, what also came out of the project, what emerged, was a widespread perception among local policymakers that local residents are harshly opposed to more integration measures. And this is at odds with the findings of this large survey that we conducted in 4 countries with a high number of local residents, which on the contrary suggests a kind of overall public support for more integration measures. So we really observe a gap between the perception that policymakers have of public opinion and what it seems public opinion thinks, according to our survey. And again, it's hard to think that these understandings and perceptions are completely decoupled from the absence of responses that I was mentioning before. So to conclude, in our policy brief, we provide a kind of long list of recommendations grouped into 7 areas. We have decided just to mention 3 in the interest of time, 3 probably important recommendations related to what I've mentioned before. So first, we really think it's important to find ways to extend the scope of existing multi-level coordination mechanisms to small localities specifically, or to create some venues or any way to foster the participation of these small localities in debates on migrant integration at the EU level and also at the national level. We certainly think it's important to find ways to facilitate access to also existing funding schemes, particularly at the EU level, for these small localities. So we provide a number of possible options in our policy brief. So just to mention a couple of ideas, one way could be that of differentiating amongst large cities and small localities in some of the existing funding schemes. Another option could be creating a special technical assistance office supporting small localities that want to apply for EU funding. But again, we provide a number of also other possible ideas in the policy brief. And finally, we think it would be really crucial to provide incentives and help local policymakers develop local inclusion strategies, engaging the whole of the community. Why? Because we see that the few localities that had inclusive and robust measures, let's say, in place, all had developed some years before a comprehensive local integration strategy. So we really think this is another key dimension that should not be underestimated. Again, this is just a selected list. If you want, you can download our policy brief using this QR code here. It's still in a kind of preliminary version in the sense that we need to, we plan to revise it based also on inputs received today, and it will be uploaded in our website very soon, I think. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Andrea. Particularly interesting, two of your last points there, that a lot of the local policy makers have assimilationist understandings where they believe that the migrants themselves are chiefly responsible for integrating, coupled with this perception that local residents are opposed to integration measures. It sounds like kind of an excuse for inaction, right? So maybe we can talk more about that a bit later. Okay, so let's next hear from Irene Ponzo from the International and European Forum on Migration, more about the Whole-COMM results.
Okay, we are almost there. Oh, yeah. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm going to present the strategy paper that is complementary to the policy brief, and it's a draft, then very open to suggestions. And I want to start by illustrating the main rationale to view. Underline the strategy paper. Okay, so Here you see the main differences between the strategy paper and the policy brief. The policy brief is focused on small and medium-sized towns and rural areas, while the strategy papers is focused only on rural areas. And while the policy brief aims to make migrant integration strategies more sensitive to the specificities associated with municipality sides, the strategy paper aims to make the EU vision on rural areas migration sensitive, so somehow they are complementary. And finally, the policy paper offers concrete policy recommendations, while the strategy paper offers strategic hints for a reorientation of the vision on rural areas. Why this focus on rural areas? Well, actually, rural areas are facing specific challenges. They show worse performances, a fast demographic decline and fast aging processes compared to towns and cities, and also worse indicators of migrant integration, as stressed also in the EU plan for integration and inclusion. At the same time, rural areas are gaining salience in the European public debate. A case in point was the harsh debate around the common agricultural policy that was adopted in January 2023, but migrants were completely neglected in that debate. And more recently, the farmers' protest, brought rural areas at the core of the European debate, but the role of migrants in for the sustainability of the European agricultural system was completely and has been completely neglected. So the main objectives, the strategy paper aims to, as I said, contribute to a strategic reorientation of the EU vision on rural areas to make it more migrant sensitive. And the objective is to raise awareness on the role of migrants, especially among decision makers and stakeholders engaged in rural development at all levels of government, rather than among, let's say, stakeholders working on migration who are probably aware of many of the issues illustrated in the paper. And with this purpose, we have reviewed the main EU strategy document in this domain, that is the long-term vision for rural areas, for stronger, connected, resilient and prosperous rural areas, that was adopted in 2021, with the aim of developing a common vision by 2040. Actually, we believe that is a window of opportunity to enhance the role of migrants in the development of rural areas. And more generally, we believe that European rural areas have a lot to gain from a greater attention, from paying a greater attention to the challenges and the benefits brought about by migrants. The structure of the strategy paper, well, actually it mirrors the articulation of the rural vision that is organized in 4 blocks, in 4 areas of action: stronger rural areas, connected rural areas, resilient rural areas, and prosperous rural areas. And for each block, we have identified challenges and strategic aims. I would say that the strategic hints start from the assumption that rural areas, rural municipalities, which are really small, often lack the capacity, as Andrea said earlier, to develop migrant-specific measures. And I will say something more on that. Then, this table summarizes all the challenges and the strategic hints. I will not go through all of them because the clock is ticking. Then I will illustrate, let's say, 3 of them, and maybe we will have the chance to come back to the other challenges during the debate. And I would start with the challenge number 2, then the marginalization of rural communities in decision-making processes over migrant integration. Andrea has already illustrated this challenge. And in this regard, the strategic hint as bringing migration into non-migrant specific policy venues. Then, beyond opening up policy-making venues on migration to small localities, it would be important to bring migration in non-migration policy-making venues. Why? Because rural municipalities may not have the capacity to participate in several issue-based policy-making fora, given that migration is one of the many issues. Of course, there are policy-making fora on elderly people, youth, gender, local development, and so on and so forth. Probably for those municipalities, the most viable option is participating in non-specialized fora, articulated in thematic subgroup, such as, for instance, the European Committee of Regions. And indeed, in the Work Package 3 policy brief, the European Committee of Regions seems to be the only EU policy-making venue where small localities have actually a voice. While for the third challenge, the migrants' difficulties in accessing local services, of course, it is due to many different reasons. On the one hand, migrants, have a poor knowledge of the national language, of the functioning of the local services, but on the other hand, rural localities often lack the expertise and the experience and the resources to deal with diversity. And in this regard, rather than pushing individual municipalities to set up migrant-specific measures, we believe that it could be helpful to develop supra-municipal infrastructure able to support local services in becoming migrant-friendly and in adopting, for instance, the solution offered by the toolbox, such as translating and simplifying materials, providing intercultural mediation, training the staff, that, could be feasible for small towns and medium-sized, but not so much for very small municipalities in rural areas. Of course, this solution already exists in some countries, but it's not so widespread, I would say. And then I will go to the last challenges, because I know that, the time is running out, and it is about neglect the role of migrant workers in EU agricultural policies. I said a few words earlier, and indeed the vision regards the CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy, and also the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development as major sources of funding to prompt sustainable rural development. However, migrants are completely disregarded, and in the vision, in the rural vision, migrants are framed only as disadvantaged workers and victims of discrimination, than as people in need of support, and not as people able to contribute to develop prosperous rural areas. And we just want to stress that, on the one hand, migrants as employees and entrepreneurs ensure the production of traditional food products in many rural areas. Tiziana mentioned at the very beginning the Parmigiano Reggiano that is produced thanks to the contribution of migrants. But at the same time, by merging different traditions, they can be a source of innovation in the agri-food activities, both as producers and consumers. So, they should be regarded as crucial agents to to maintain, to refresh, and to expand the local food landscape and to develop prosperous rural areas. So I'll leave it here, and I look forward to receiving your comments.
Thanks very much, Irene. If you could pull up the next presentation, that would be great. So we've just heard the results. So now the big question is, what should policymakers do with those results? So very helpfully, we're now going to have a presentation of the Whole-COMM policy toolkit for local authorities to take what has been learned here and to actually implement improvements and things that will make things work better on the ground. So, to tell us about the policy toolkit, I'd like to turn the floor over to Sinem Yilmaz and Vasek Yavkan from the Migration Policy Group.
Thank you very much for this generous introduction, and I'd like to also thank all the previous presenters for setting the stage for hearing more about the comparative results and toolkit. So I'd like to first say that Migration Policy Group and its researchers who were involved in this project from the beginning, we were very happy to be part of this consortium and contribute to the knowledge production, because it really matched our goals of producing analytical tools for comparative analysis, but also as a think and do tank, we value doing part, and that's what the toolkit tries to do in trying to help municipalities, small localities with some self-assessment, but also some guidance on self-reflection and how to improve. So in the initial part, I will expand a bit on the comparative results Andrea has illustrated with regards to the tool we have developed called MyPEX-L, and shortly after me, Sinem will follow with the toolkit. So I think I can
just point it over there.
All right, I don't think it's working, but yep. Oh yeah, okay, maybe too much now, I think. Oh, it's just go back. Oh, that's the first one. Okay, yeah, we can continue. Next one, yeah. Thank you, Andrea. So we try to bring in our expertise from the national and also regional policy making assessment tools, and in order to bring some systematic comparison to the different localities and municipalities involved in Whole-COMM project. And in doing this for benchmarking, we identify the highest European and international normative standards on asylum and refugee and migrant integration and human rights protection, such as the EU Action Plan on Integration and Inclusion. And finally, in the index, we try to offer an initial overview of integration policies, as well as from the perspective of 39 localities involved in the project from the EU member states, as well as Turkey. And we can move to the next one. Sorry. In doing this, we try to provide evidence-based knowledge to foster migrant integration at the local level, the use of indicators for the integration policy evaluation at the local level, and we also try to pinpoint the contribution of local actors in the integration process, bring it to the local level, also foster the capacity for mutual learning between the municipalities, and propose the tool for better exploration of the linkages between integration and policy outcomes, which will come later. I would like to also emphasize that we can move to the next one, Andrea, thank you. It was not an easy task, because local level is a lot complicated than the national level, with more competence issues, different actors at various levels. So we have actually gone through a very arduous process of continuous consistency checks. So I'd like to thank all the researchers of Whole-COMM for putting up with us, sitting through hour-long meetings, revising and refining in helping us to come up with a pilot scale and we hope that it will help future projects and our future work in further refining and developing these measurements. So in doing this, we have identified some main dimensions. Those are governance of integration policy, the actors involved, quality assurance mechanisms, and policy areas on integration, together with the Whole-COMM researchers and researchers at MPG. Can move to the next one because I want to cut this part short. So here is a quick snapshot just to show how messy things can be. But I will summarize all of these results for you very quickly. But this is just to see, for you to see how the data set looks like. If you want to see more of it, there are copies of it outside at the welcome desk, along with as part of the policy note we've produced with our partners at Malmö on the index and its implications also on where we also evaluate the implications on public opinion. We can move the next one, the after one. Yes, perfect. So what did this pilot project and the results show us? They show that only few municipalities have actually adopted clear and comprehensive strategy of migrant integration. As Andreas initially mentioned, there were not many that touched upon the rationales, goals, scopes, or targets. And actually, those who did this were actually doing quite good on the other dimensions of the index, showing the importance of having a strategy at this point. And in terms of the involvement of different stakeholders, that while there were some mechanisms, most of it was very ad hoc, not systematic, and they were not empowered to be involved in policy making and implementation. Except for some towns across the municipalities, the monitoring mechanisms were very weak. And when it comes to policy areas, municipalities are mostly engaged in promoting more favorable conditions and better access for migrants in the areas of language, education, healthcare, labor market, but still very limited development of policy in the areas of anti-discrimination, political participation, and intercultural communication. So we also wanted to see how these, we can move to the next one, thank you, Andrea, how this correlated with the MIPEX, the Whole-COMM typology. And we saw that actually those municipalities with more favorable structural conditions in terms of their basic and economic indicators had higher scores. Rural municipalities had considerably lower scores as compared to the medium and small ones. And when political constituencies are considered, not surprisingly, municipalities governed by a conservative party are more likely to have low scores on migrant integration compared to the others. Now here, we wanted to identify some obstacles, which we try to address with actually the toolkit that will come up next. So maybe the next slide, which will be, I believe, the last one. So here we also wanted to look at how these integration, why we should care about integration policies, how they matter. And we just picked up one issue that the Whole-COMM researchers are dealing with, are researching on, and their own national and local context, which was social cohesion and public attitudes. And we actually found that doing some preliminary analysis on the survey conducted as part of Whole-COMM project, that actually first, the integration scores matter as a general result, I can say. And in general, in municipalities where there are better integration policies, the opinions are more favorable towards migrants. And we also compared attitudes towards Ukrainian and non-European Union refugees. They are clearly overall, as we would expect, they are more favorable towards the Ukrainian refugees as compared to the non-EU refugees. However, this difference is a lot smaller when we look at municipalities with better integration policies. So that actually shows that better integration policies create this positive attitude regardless of the refugee in question. So this difference, at least the difference is smaller. We looked in particular different different attitudes, not just an overall attitude, perception of actual integration, relations with host community and policies supporting these groups, and they were consistent across the board, something we would like to explore further, but it also suggests why municipalities should see integration as a policy option for dealing with societal pressures, because a lot of times we see societal pressures as the rationale for more restrictive policies on migration, but these policies also show that there are, these results also show that there are alternatives, ways of addressing this, and better integration policies is one of them. I'll leave it at that to Sinem to elaborate more on the
Thanks a lot. Yeah, first of all, you can find printed copies, like a booklet, really nice ones on the table outside, so it will be easier to follow the presentation with it, because since it's a toolbox, so there are so many benchmarks and explanations in it, but I will try to do my best to give a summary, especially how we developed it and what are the main dimensions that we covered in the toolbox. So, Andrea, I still need to ask you. I'm so sorry. And there are like 10 slides or something. So, okay. So, yeah, out of this complexity that everyone mentioned before me, we try to create a tool that can fit at least for the majority of the municipalities. So that was a bit of a challenge, but we tried our best to really cover the needs of the municipalities in general. So it's a really comprehensive tool for local level stakeholders, not only for municipalities, but also for NGOs as well, and others working on the ground at the local level to develop effective and inclusive integration policies. So it has mainly two objectives. One of them is self-evaluation for local stakeholders to really look at their ongoing projects and initiatives and also policies, and to evaluate it with the benchmarks that we created here. And also the second objective is to use it as a guidance, as a planning tool when they would like to create a policy or when they would like to start a practice or initiative, so they can really go over the benchmarks and try to really start their policy and project with the benchmarks that we created. Yeah, we can go to the next one. So the toolbox, as everyone before me mentioned, like every municipality has different needs, and in terms of context, political context, and also the size of the municipality is really important to decide what they are going to do. So we are aware of this when we created this toolbox, and we try to really address their diverse needs. And in the toolbox, we hope that every municipality can find something, a strategy that can work for their needs. And also, of course, the migrant populations that they host is also different in different municipalities. So we also try to identify like the diversity in migrants and try to create like individual methodologies for migrants as well. So we believe that integration has a cross-sectoral nature. So that's why it's really important to work across sectors. It could be private sector, NGOs, and the municipalities together, or all other relevant stakeholders, and also, of course, together with migrants. We also recognize the importance of including migrants in the process from the beginning, and we try to really encourage it with our strategies in the toolbox. So we also have some good practices for stakeholders to look and get the inspiration when they design their own policies and practices. Yeah. As I said before, the target audience, of course, is local municipalities, but also it's also applicable to non-profits working on the ground, and also it can also be a knowledge base for migrants and refugees who really would like to learn about it, also for the researchers to really see what kind of strategies we developed. So we started, so there is a methodology to develop this toolbox. So we, of course, started with benchmarking. So maybe we can go to next slide, so that will be easy to see. So we started from the EU and international documents, resources that we can find. So some of them are listed here, but they are not all. So there is a huge list of resources that we checked to create the initial benchmarks. So they were the foundations for us. So some of them are global compacts on migration and refugees. We also used our own resources as a migration policy group, our tools like that we created with UNHCR before, MyPEX-R that Başak mentioned, and also MyPEX-L that Başak just presented. We also analyzed reports, and also we really got support from our Whole-COMM researchers and their notes from the field. That helped a lot. And as a second step, we thought that, like, of course, like we started with desk research and looked at the researchers at international level, but we were also aware that they will, most of them will not maybe work at the local level, so we had to speak with the local stakeholders themselves, and our Whole-COMM researchers organized local level workshops in their localities, and we got feedback from them, and we redrafted the toolbox. And in the end, we also had a mixed working group workshop in Brussels in November last year, and we got another feedback round, and we collected lots of feedback from the local stakeholders, and we finalized the toolbox. So we try to create it, we use the co-creation methodology to develop this toolbox. We can go to the next one. So how they can use the toolbox, because we know that like some municipalities are very small with limited capacities, and we don't want to really discourage them by showing that a list of benchmarks that they need to do to have an inclusive integration policy. We know that it's not possible for all of them, but of course we try to create a kind of flexible system in this toolbox so that they can really, first of all, self-assess themselves, like what are their priorities. It's just education, for example, for some of them, maybe like at the moment one municipality is really focusing on employment, so they can really go to that chapter and try to see what they can do with the benchmarks that we created. Of course, like we also try to create a comprehensive approach with 5 dimensions that we created, but it's also flexible to really go to different chapters and try to see what works for them. And also, they can also adjust the recommendations according to their needs and their context and the size of the municipality as well. So they can learn from examples, and they can also create this stakeholder engagement. And it's not a fixed document, so they can go back to that whenever they need to create another strategy or another policy regarding migrant integration. So we have 5 main dimensions here: governance, employment, education, health, housing, and urban planning. I'm not going to go into details, but I will briefly just show what we looked in general. Maybe Andrea, we can go to the next slide. And so under governance, we looked at if they have any strategic plan, accountability, their financial situation, also like coordination and cooperation, the training capacities, and also diversity and inclusion policies, along with all other benchmarks that you can see in the toolbox. And under employment and vocational training, we looked at education, skills recognition, training needs, again, so customized, inclusive support and targeted programs, like among others. And under education, we looked at if they ensure equal access and transition support and parental engagement, and also targeted financial and family resources for migrant children. And for health, which is one of the most problematic dimensions, like that we saw in the results of other Whole-COMM works as well. So it's a bit difficult to create kind of strategies for health and housing, but we tried our best to see, at least like to give the benchmarks that they can inspire from. And housing as well, like anti-segregation measures, and of course there's this market strain in general for most people, not only for migrants in many municipalities. So we try to recognize that as well and try to create some solutions. So now we finalized it, but we did not have a chance to really formally pilot it with municipalities. But for the ones who are interested, who work at local level, we will be really happy if you just try to use it for your policies or new initiatives and send us some feedback. We will be happy to really get your feedback and also try to improve the toolbox and at least like to pilot it a bit with your help. Thanks a lot. If you have any questions, you can always send your questions to our emails as well.
Thanks very much, Sinem and Başak, for walking us through that toolkit. So now, four of you can take your seats, and I'd like to welcome up the roundtable discussants, the final three panelists. You can come take your seats up here with me. So we're now going to enter into the roundtable discussion where we will dive into the results, the strategy paper, and the toolkit, get some reaction from some of the partners. And then also you in the audience will be able to ask your questions both to the discussants but also to the people who just presented the results. They'll be able to answer from their seats in the audience. So let me introduce you to the roundtable. We have here with us Jussi Lane from the MATILDE project, Carol Arnaud from the Reroute project, and Annelies Zoomers from the Welcoming Spaces project. Welcome to all three of you. Thanks for being with us here today. Jussi, why don't we start with you? Let's hear some of your reactions to what we just heard.
I have two. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. So thank you so much for having me here. Our project was very closely connected to the Whole-COMM, and the results in the sense that I heard them today resonate really well with what we were working on. So it's wonderful to hear that perhaps we too made something right, because it was in a way confirmed here. The MATILDE project focused really on remote and rural mountainous areas in Europe, which is often forgotten that 3/3 of Europe is very rural and remote, and hence has to be a focus of our efforts as well. Migration, especially as we heard today, has a great potential to rejuvenate some of these regions, which are filled with a number of challenges, as we heard today, demographic decline and the whole vicious circle that stems out from that. Migration is not any kind of a silver bullet that will automatically solve these issues, but we need to create a context where that potential can be better capitalized. And I think Whole-COMM did a wonderful job in highlighting some of those challenges therein and the obstacles that we need to face in that. I think what really strikes me today, and I come from Finland, very close to the Russian border actually at the moment, where the climate for pushing that kind of policies that you recommended, and I very much agree with your recommendations, but the climate where I come from goes completely the opposite direction. There's a lot of discrimination at the moment, a lot of xenophobia. There's downright racism at the moment. And of course, many of what is going on with our eastern neighbor at the moment resonates broadly with migration policies. We have a government in place who has openly stated that 0 asylum applications is our official goal. And that's the political goal. And I work a lot at the border region, at the remote regions, and really to talk about issues like this is difficult. When I talk about a very pro-migration, or if I give a pro-migration talk, my inbox is going to be filled with emails, and not the kindest kind. So I think our societies have become very much internally torn, and that diminishes the capacity for us to capitalize on that policy. And let me say one more thing that I think is important. If we think about more conceptually, and those of you who have heard me talk before know what is coming. I think sometimes we focus too much on integration as a bureaucratic tool. Our project focused more on impact of migrants. And I close with this statement: integration does not automatically mean impact. And we can have impact without integration. And I can talk a lot more about that if needed.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to come back to that. That's interesting. Annelies, let's turn to you next. Tell us a bit about the Welcoming Spaces project and what you made of the Whole-COMM results.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and it's nice to be in between sister projects. And we are all, and also Welcoming Spaces, we are bringing our program to an end. And indeed, we are very similar, but also different, not only in terms of countries, but our focus was a little bit in line more with MATILDE, where we did not focus so much on integration in itself, but more also to the question, well, what could be also the potential contribution of migrants to the revitalization of poorer, marginalized areas. So there's a kind of difference. The 21st of June, we will have our final conference in Utrecht. So if you are interested, please be welcome. So as an input for the discussion, I was listening, and it's based on our results that I would like to bring in 3 issues for the discussion. First, also related to what you just said, and also in my own country, of course, it's not comparable, but it's not going in the right direction in the Netherlands. But one of our main results, if we look at the outcomes of our programs together, is that it is striking how many positive examples there are. And we are all repeating each other that there's a context of anti-migration. But at the same time, if we look at society itself, it is much more welcoming, which then sometimes suggested by policymakers, especially national government and the media. So one of the issues is also how can we make all the positive examples more visible in such a way that we show that public opinion is different from what is suggested. So that is the positive thing, to get some hope, etc. And we are repeating each other all the time, and I'm increasingly wondering, why are we doing that? Why are we not more critical also to the media, etc.? And what can we do to make those experiences visible and to make those places that have a positive attitude connect to each other? And so we are focusing now on the communities itself, but it is also about between the communities. What can we do to mobilize our positive energy in such a way that it becomes visible and is mainstreamed? So that's one issue. Then another issue, and that has to do with our own approach and the question. That the question in our research was, we wanted to focus on migration and create some positive possibilities, and that was the reason why we said, well, we can focus on the positive contributions migrants make to local development, for example. But in our program, we started also a critical debate on ourselves. It's a very utilitarian approach, of course. So that is also for the debate. We know why we framed our program, why we did. But at the same time, we are critical about whether or not, only if there is some utility, that there is some space for migrants. There is some tension there. And so I noticed that when I had to explain what we were doing, I downplayed that part of our program more and more, because that is not the way I would like to see it. And there's also other reasons why we should take care indeed of other communities, etc. And while doing research, there's another ethical issue, because one of the striking conclusions is also indeed how bypassed many of those rural areas have been over the final places, how much poverty there is. And many people, migrants and local people, are no longer in their preferred localities, especially not migrants. Many people that we found in those localities are in those localities because they are enforced to be there. But so there is a lot of positive energy. They are welcomed. At the same time, the conditions in those areas are such that nobody would like to stay there. So the question is, that's also ethical. If there are possibilities in those places and people would prefer to go in other places, who are we to decide that those are the places that they should settle? That is something that we should be critical about. Then finally, and that's, well, with a big distance from our findings, but more, about funding. And so if we focus, so not the migration is an issue in many places, and not migrant integration, but the real issue in many of those places is that the situation is not good. So the real question is how to improve the situation of the whole population. And I can talk about it more conceptually, why we use emplacement instead of integration. But I think in the end it's about the question, what kind of investments do those areas need? What is the future of those areas? And of course there's then space for local people, including the migrants. But in terms of money, and that's the final thing I would like to raise, and that was already in the beginning of our program, we spent billions of dollars on keeping migrants out, migration policies, the whole industry of migration. Nobody is critical about the fact that all that money is spent and it is not even effective, right? If we would think about reallocating that money and then spend it on in more productive ways, for example, in those areas on development, and to demigrantize debates, and to move in the direction, okay, what is the issue? The issue is how to give a new future to all those areas that have been bypassed for a long time. We know that those areas are diverse, so if you develop plans, then you have to do it, of course, together. And then this discussion is suddenly no longer about integration and making a separation between two categories of the population, but having one dotted on the horizon and think and talk together about, okay, what is the future of our area? And of course, there is not a lack of money. That is what I would like to, so that's my kind of input for the discussion, to provoke a little bit. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Annelies. So next, let's turn to Karl. Tell us a bit about the Reroute project and what you make of the Whole-COMM results.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation and for having me. I think what I had in mind of saying has already been touched upon by not only in the presentations, but also by the two colleagues from the sister projects. And so I can just add a bit here and there. First of all, I'm a bit impressed and overwhelmed by everything I heard so far, which is a good sign. First of all, I mean, concerning the general aim of the project Whole-COMM, I think very much aligns also with what Reroute is trying to do, which is diversifying the way we look into migration and integration. If Whole-COMM wants to bring this debate to the more local level, to the regional, the municipal level, Reroute is trying to look into even kind of a diversity of smaller and sometimes larger places, sites, but also diversifying in terms of, let's say, cohorts. We're not necessarily so much focused, and then I'll rejoin you, I'll come back to that, in terms of migrants and refugees or newcomers, although these categories may apply. But we may be looking into student migrants in Hungary, or seasonal workers in Belgium and in Holland, or indeed trans-migrants in Greece. So in that respect, also very diverse, and hence our methodologies are more or exclusively qualitative. And that comes with certain limits and certain possibilities, I think. But another kind of point of overlap with Whole-COMM and Reroute is that we acknowledge very much the fact that there is a direct relationship between, let's say, integration and migration discourses and the way this is picked up by local communities, by societal actors, and how indeed a positive kind of framing may have encouraging effects on collaborations and interactions at a local and regional level. But that also means that it can go into the other direction, which is, and that's what we're struggling against. So I think the option we've taken from Reroute is that realizing that there's been over the last decades, but certainly over the last decade, a kind of over-dramatization of migration and refugees through the terminology of crisis. Right? There's been what we call an over-governmentalization of the phenomenon, which enables political entrepreneurs of all sorts to capitalize on that and say, look, we're here facing a huge problem, and it's threatening our civilization, you know. So that kind of effects, try to go against that by saying perhaps we need to get away a little bit from the political actors and try to see what can be done at the societal level. But I was very happy to see how in the course of the presentations, from focusing rather strongly on political policymakers and politicians and so on, even at the local and regional level, you moved through your policy briefs and the strategy paper and the toolkit, finally, you ended up with dealing with stakeholders and opening it up to a diversity of local actors who, in interrelationship with politicians, can change things, start changing things from below. And that's very much the kind of take Reroute used, adding to that the demigrantization kind of perspective. If you look at a particular site, a particular communal context, then you see an interaction of people who can be classified as newcomers or migrants or not, in different degrees of autochthony or allochthony, if you like. You try to consider them as, you know, a question of building society, a building community together. So for that, we also had to try to get away from the big concept of integration, but still clinging to it. Say, you can either replace it and say it's not doing the job, it's working against integration, and it actually has. But moving into towards what we call minor integrations. So everyday, rather banal kind of interaction are taking place in which people collaborate and do all sorts of things, and in which their capacities, their competencies are kind of coming to the fore. So that's basically the kind of vibe I hear in this room, also with the other projects, and I like that very much. And I think Reroute still has a year and more to go. We will definitely be able to build on everything that you've produced to take it where we want to take it, which is also building a kind of a toolkit, which is basically also directed towards societal actors rather than policymakers as such, but from these societal acts will invite to start politicizing, so to speak, you know, the things they're doing, and all the you call it the positive outcomes and collaborations that come out of it. So I'll leave it at that, and that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thanks, Karel. So, Jussi, I wanted to come back to the point you made right at the end there when you said integration doesn't mean impact. What did you mean by that?
Well, not automatically. It can, of course, but I feel that sometimes if we understand integration as a bureaucratic ladder that one needs to climb in order to get to a certain point in society where you could have an impact, that approach to me is challenging. We see in the regions that we studied that we had people who had not integrated according to that bureaucratic procedure, who had a major impact in the societies, either economic or social impact. At the same time, it goes the other way around. We can have people who have managed to climb the bureaucratic ladder, had no impact or very little impact. And this is not to say that the concept of integration is bad, but I think sometimes we need to broaden it a little bit. And I think you used emplacement. I think that's a wonderful word. Inclusion is a wonderful word. What I mean by that is that integration often these days, and maybe it was even repeated by Mr. Dardufas in his opening remarks, that integration is today considered as a two-way street, right? It's true, but it's not enough to understand that, because even if it's a two-way street, we are still stuck with these two categories of people: those who are integrating and those who basically form the group to which they should integrate into. And I very much agree that integration debate is very much nationally defined. I think Tiziana very well said that. So if we have this nationally defined core group to which one needs to integrate, migrant can never, ever fully achieve that. And that applies also within Europe. If I would move as a Finn to Belgium, I can try to integrate, and I can climb the ladder, but I'm still a Finn. According to that national frame, I will not come a Belgium. And I think we need to, and this is of course a broader conceptual discussion. I like how pragmatic the presentations were today, so I don't want to take it too much there. But this idea that I find challenging is that we would have some kind of a native group of people, right? And native to me comes from biology. A plant can be a native to a certain environment. If you take it out of that environment and move it somewhere else, it dies, right? I understand that. That doesn't happen to people. And I think that is important to remember.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And in particular, when you use the example of Belgium, it does point to the problematic nature of defining native nationally, because what is a Belgian, actually? And if you were for migrants in this country, actually, it's frequently discussed here in the national debate. The integration process in Flanders is very different from the integration process in Wallonia, and in many ways, these are two entirely separate cultures. So which one are you becoming? Annelies, I think this relates to what you were saying about emplacement versus integration. Tell us a little bit of what you mean by emplacement, and how does that also interact with this idea of defining these things at national level versus defining these things at regional level?
Thank you. Emplacement takes the community as a point of departure, the place, and places are by definition occupied by diverse groups, and so it is mainly about thinking about rebuilding community in a concrete space. So if you do that, then you by definition start talking about local things and connectivities to other places, etc. So that is the dot on the horizon, where if you have that approach, then, and you start discussing about, for example, what kind of community do we want to be, then you get a different dynamics between people already that can help, of course, integration processes. But it's not the one group integrating into another. It is remaking. It's a process of fusion. It will come with changes of the whole community. That's very different from the idea of you integrate one group into another. And so I think that is my own definition. You have, of course, scholars who introduce the definition, who use different definitions, but this is a little bit what I try to highlight. So it's accepting the fact that communities are dynamic by definition, by the inflow and outflow of people, which is natural. And maybe also thinking about our own program. So we do basically research in places that, according to migration theory, are areas that people leave from. Because and that is what happened. They became small and shrinking because of rural-urban migration. And if you look at it like that, so it's so not logical then to expect other people to settle there and to integrate, because it is another category of people who are supposed to have a different behavior from all those people who decided to leave and go to the cities. And of course, also migrants are looking for a good life, etc. So who are we, again, to decide where they have to live and integrate? So I'm more and more critical about that whole idea, in spite of the world that we are living in now. But we should not give up, I think. And mobility is part of normal life. Yeah.
Carl, you mentioned this idea of over-governmentalization of migration, and I think that probably also jibes with over-nationalization of migration, as we've just been discussing. What do you think is the solution here? Because, as you say, when the media is always using the word crisis, when this is always seen as a national issue, and regions and municipalities are not really being listened to, how do we change that dynamic, both with the media and with politicians?
Thank you for this very big question. But I think there are two roads perhaps towards this, and one of the roads is being explored now, I think, by all of us. I think that the idea of starting to downscale from the national away to the more local level and to places and see the dynamics that are happening there enables you to start seeing the complexity of, I would say, the intersection of places and communities. I'll take the Belgian example there. Belgium, yes, it hardly exists, but it's divided up into communities, and the Flemish community and the Francophone community, and in regions, 3 regions. So these things are not similar, and not that I want to impose or suggest a Belgian model, but I think it shows that places can be very complex in terms of networking and community links that can be very translocal and transnational, and indeed communities in themselves can be in different ways emplaced, if you like. So we need to look into that. But what I'm trying to say is that if you get away from the national level, the national ideologies of groupism, okay, of one homogeneous kind of group, has more or less been taken over by Europe. And I think that's not the best way to go. They rather should, and that's the place to introduce this, to look into the complexity of local community making to say what Europe is all about. It has always been about a huge diversity of placemaking in cities, smaller cities, in rural areas. And so that's the model we should use to get away from the groupisms that are, well, that are lethal in a sense. And I think Europe must really try to find a new discourse on its identity and its borders to start empowering also what is happening at the local level, because it seems to be it's a bit going into the wrong direction. It's disempowering rather. I mean, I was just thinking, I saw in the policy paper that you mentioned the action plan on integration and inclusion, and in fact in one of our policy papers it's also there. It's a wonderful document, you know. It has a very positive message to bring, but do people know that? No, they know about Frontex, they know about trying to block the refugees at the borders, the hotspots, etc. So at least highlighting, foregrounding the integration and inclusion messages that are there and that refer to villages and regions and so on and so forth. Exactly, get away from the national is a good way forward, I think. Thank you.
Okay, let me check if there are any questions from the audience for the panelists. Do we have any questions? Yes, right here. You can hit the red button right there to turn on your mic.
Thank you. I guess you can hear me, right? Yes. Lovely. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for having me here. I'm Carolina. I work at Eurocities as Projects and Policy Officer. So thanks a lot for the insights you shared. I have one question mainly for the panelists before, but happy to hear any comments in the room, even over the break if it's needed, since we don't have much time left. We're currently working on a project focused on co-designing migrant integration strategies with migrant people. As far as I see in most of the outcomes of your research, there's somehow a whole of community approach, and I would say it's an outcome, right? I'm just wondering, and I know the context in cities is different than the one of towns, of course. So having in mind, maybe this can be more challenging. I'm just wondering if you see the participation of migrant people as a solution somehow, because that's what we're seeing a lot in cities as something really efficient. So I'm wondering if you think this could be something feasible in smaller realities, I would say. So it could be done in many different ways, of course, and I know there's a narrative change that needs to take place somehow. I'm personally from northern Italy, and I grew up in a town, and my parents are migrants, so I also see I know very well how migrants are seen. But yeah, I'm wondering if there's any room for that, if it's an outcome you have, or anything like that. Thank you.
Andrea, do you want to take that?
Well, yes, of course. I don't think we have, I think it's mentioned also in the toolkit at some point as one of the measures that we certainly recommend. And on this sense, I don't see so many differences between small towns and big cities maybe, but I'm just thinking now aloud about what could be the differences in terms of involving migrants in, to some extent, also interactions and relations in small places are even closer compared to big cities. So maybe this could be rather an advantage of involving the participation of migrants also with representatives in local councils and all these kind of things. And so certainly it's certainly one very, very important dimension. I don't know if Sinem also wants to add something on this.
Yeah, since we got a round of feedbacks from local stakeholders, this is one of the things that we got all the time. Like, they did not find it enough in the toolbox, the first version, so they always encouraged us to add this perspective as well. So, like, including migrants in the process from the beginning, not just like providing kind of services for them, but do something together with them will work. So they believe that they will work, so we hope that it will work.
Tiziana?
Very briefly, I think I mentioned the small action that we carried out within the project, that are these community walks, and we tried to engage migrants. We wanted to, bring together the local residents and the migrants in this walk through the places that were symbolizing a bit the change in the community. So these are small things, but, at the very local level, this feed into this process of, building something different from integration as a bureaucratic process, something more grassroots, I think, which our project at least try to kick off.
Okay, do we have any other questions from the audience? Yes, right here.
Thank you. My name is Emmanuel Ochiri. I'm Policy and Advocacy Officer for the European Network Against Racism. And I think I have two thoughts. I think they are more of like thoughts and questions, or like or reflections. One, for me, I think the first reflection is that we're having this conversation about migrants in cities and in local communities, and this is supposed to be around for feedback, and I look around and I'm not sure I can really see people with lived experience who should be inputting in this feedback, and I think that this is one of the foundational issues. It's the same thing. We are in a bubble. We come up with these policies, and we think that these policies would change the lives of mobile bodies when we do not even include them in the decision-making processes, and rather it's a really very extractive process where, you know, people on the move are interviewed and this information is taken, and we never know what happens with this information. So it's a really very extractive process. I don't think it's helpful, and that's a comment I wanted to raise. And the second, really, I think throughout the presentations, and of course also the discussions as well from the discussants, I kept wondering, there was something I couldn't place my finger on, or my let me say my finger, and it's basically when we discuss, I think, migration, right? Or I think that when we are supposed to discuss migration, especially as we are looking at in local communities, and, you know, the attitudes, narrative is a very big part of it. The discourse is a very big part of it. And the discourse, unfortunately, a lot of the time, and I'm not saying in all small cities, because it happens even in the larger cities and even at the political level, is this whole, I'm not going to curse, but this whole really crazy stuff about the Great Replacement theory. And so for me, is when developing toolkits, right, or toolboxes, and when discussing how can we not use race and decolonialism or decoloniality as a principal lenses through which to view this. I think we can try to be as practical as we want to be. We can try to be as conceptual, as theoretical as we want to be. But if we don't address the elephants in the room, the solutions are still going to probably exacerbate the same things. And one thing, I like what Annalise mentioned about utilitarianism, because when we talk about migrants and small cities, it's always about how can migrants help rebuild the small cities. So it's about migrants still being seen as a source of labor. And this is a continuation of colonial ways of looking at specific groups of individuals or specific communities. And so when we don't center race and colonialism as part of our analysis and the toolkit, unfortunately we are going to come up with results that simply replicate these issues. And one of the fundamental problems with that is that it also leads to brain drain as well. And because of the brain drain, societies, or in the global majority perhaps, are not able to build or develop, and you're still going to have movement. And I think that's why it's really important in these spaces. You need to have the people who are affected by this in these spaces, because if you do not have them in these spaces, we are going to continue coming up with policies, investing so much time and resources into policies which basically are just going to be co-opted by the far right, and then they start saying, well, they are coming to get your jobs. Because I think we really need to be very, very critical in our approach, even in how we design our approach. And one of the reasons I'm saying this is because, you know, we currently launch a project where we are looking at the precarity of living as a racialized migrant in Europe, but also looking at border regions in Europe where you have small cities in terms of racial violence, of course, not only from the authorities. And the very same thing keeps on coming up, is this whole notion of the Great Replacement theory. And so I think it's really important that we need to center race and colonialism as key aspects in our discussions on migration, because who is a migrant, who is an expert, who is a mobile body? When we say someone is a migrant, we already are contextualizing what kind of rights they can benefit from. When we say someone is an expert, we are not necessarily limiting those rights. So I think how we really understand who is a mobile body, and we can define them as migrants or as experts or whatever, or as a refugee or an asylum seeker. But I think how we define who a mobile body is also really very important. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, these are all really good points. Sina, let me put it to you. In terms of developing the toolbox, but in terms of developing the toolbox, I think it's a really interesting question in terms of the practicalities versus the big issues, and also I think, especially to that last point, do you distinguish in the toolbox between a racialized migrant and a non-racialized migrant?
Yep. First of all, I totally agree that like the narrative about seeing migrants as a labor force, and like I don't even want to use that. Like we need migrants because we need them. So when the time comes and we don't need migrants in terms of work, then what we are going to do? So I totally agree. And I also would like to underline that since we worked with all Whole-COMM researchers in this process, so they really underline this this narrative, and they really would like to put this perspective in the toolbox with their comments as well, not seeing migrants as a total like in a box by putting them all in a box, or not considering the narrative. But for practical reasons, of course, we always use migrants and refugees, and in relevant places we also refer to like different categories of migrants, but we don't have this like racialized perspectives or race discourse in the narrative, so in the toolbox. So we did not really add this from the beginning, but we, like as I said, like with the comments coming from the researchers, so they really try to show us the differences between different groups and their needs, and not seeing them as a kind of labor force. And everyone in the room, maybe in the second part as well, they will underline, so not seeing integration as a labor market integration only. So we try to show this perspective, but there are also lots of challenges. Like our main challenge was to really fit these strategies to different contexts, to different groups. So we consider these aspects, but I'm not sure if we fully give this message in the toolbox in a technical kind of tool. So yeah, but these are really good comments to consider in the future as well. Thank you.
And Annelies, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much. I very much agree on what you said, and I want to add something also, because we just talked about Europe, etc. And it's also time, of course, to rethink Europe and our very Eurocentric vision of the world, as if we are the center. And I'm referring also, for migration, it's of course also important to have an idea about whether or not we are seen as preferred destination. We think, right? But it's also a time of global resentment from global South countries. I still use this word, but it's time also for Europe to think about our position in the world, etc. And I think we have to be modest, more modest than we are, and rethink indeed the Frontex and all those things, because we are blind in our policy making for the fact that from the outside we have a very different image than what we think we have. And many people who come to Europe have a clear idea about what their preferred destination is and why, etc. So it's not the Netherlands, even though that in the Netherlands we also, some people think that everybody wants to come to the Netherlands. Nobody wants to come to the Netherlands in the end, right? So to rethink. But well, let's see.
Well, as Sina mentioned, we'll talk more about these issues in the panel after the coffee break. So we're going to take a 15-minute coffee break now, and then we're going to hear about the experiences from the Whole-COMM communities on the ground. So that'll give us some really great insights into really specific locations and what's specifically going on in these various areas. So I invite you outside for a 15-minute coffee break. Further discuss these issues. We'll meet back in here at 10 after 11.
Local communities come from afar. They have ancient stories to tell to new people coming from Local communities come from afar. They have ancient stories to tell to new people coming from the outside world, looking for a place to call home again. And the all story changes. Local communities never stayed put, neither do they today. Migrants are the newcomers. Integration is a community-making process. It takes place in local and rural areas and is brought about by daily interactions, multiple actors. 10 countries, 40 localities. The Whole-COMM European project will address these issues through an innovative research approach that matches different methods and impact analyses of policies on immigrants' integration. Cohesive and resilient communities embrace change, making the most of each and everyone.
Somos Olot, La Garrocha, estem en la mezquita El Fath, que ja porta des del 2005 que està instal·lada. Soc l'imam Rahal Houmi, d'origen marroquí, nascut a Casablanca. Vaig marxar del país quan tenia uns 18 anys, just després de batxillerat. Vaig desplaçar cap a Olot per motius laborals i aquí m'he casat i tinc la meva família. Olot va conèixer una arribada massiva d'immigrants i clar, aquest teixit social ha anat canviant. La comunitat musulmana és representada per el col·lectiu marroquí, gambià, senegalesos, mauritanis, Mali. I a part d'això hi ha resta de comunitats com la comunitat hindú que ha arribat després, la xinesa també. Cal calcar que Olot és una ciutat pequeña i la gent del poble eren una mica, no diria tancats, sinó reservats. A l'arribada massiva ja sabem que el desconegut sempre provoca un misteri, no? I inclús diria por. Amb el pas del temps, la gent ha anat acceptant la realitat. També s'ha notat el que és l'aspecte de la ciutat. Per exemple, podem trobar la carnisseria halal, que és especialitat per al col·lectiu musulmà, i s'ha anat trencant una mica aquest gel. No del tot, sempre hi haurà prejudicis, però això és normal, inclús en les ciutats grans. Però en les ciutats petites es nota més. La mesquita en un país musulmà no té el mateix paper que la mesquita en un país europeu, digués. Perquè la mesquita en un país musulmà és un lloc de pregària i res més. La mesquita en Europa fa com una mena de pont entre el col·lectiu i el resta de la comunitat. I a més, quan un immigrant arriba, el primer que pregunta és on està la mesquita, per informar-se què s'ha de fer, té problemes de lloguer, té problemes de feina, de paper.
Muchas veces sientes a gente que se queja del racismo, aquí u otro sitio, pero en realidad, para ser honestos, lo aplicamos entre nosotros. Este es del norte, este es del sur, este es así, este es blanco, este es... Es la realidad. Por lo tanto, esto dijo el profeta sallallahu alaihi wasallam hace 14 siglos. Los asuntos de la ignorancia son bajo mis pies. Entre estos, esto que vivimos.
També fem classes d'àrab per mainada, per conservar una mica l'idioma materna. I, clar, per falta de material hem d'anar buscant solucions, com aquesta, per exemple, que és posar lugati en àrab i en català és la meva llengua, no? Fet per nosaltres, no? Fet per mi. Jo crec que la comunitat és una necessitat, perquè volem o no, som socials i hem nascut socials i el ser humà és així. Necessita el ser humà per conviure i per entreajudar i per mil coses. O sigui que la comunitat és tal com diu l'Alcorà, ens hem fet de pobles diferents, de tribus diferents per conèixer uns als altres. Ho diu textualment l'Alcorà. O sigui que som de la mateixa font, però tenim aquesta necessitat de viure junts. I per mi la comunitat és un espai, diguéssim, no espai físic ni en el temps, sinó per on s'ajunten persones que tenen molts punts en comuns, que poden ser religiosos, poden ser culturals, poden ser humans. Aquesta és la percepció meva de la comunitat.
Si è creata una forte criticità, una forte difficoltà nel vivere allo stesso tempo lo spazio urbano da parte dei residenti e delle persone straniere.
Vedo molti visi noti, molti di voi partecipano all'attività del comitato di quartiere, in particolare allo sportello pubblico. Molti di voi ci inviano messaggi, molti di voi ci sollecitano degli interventi.
Cuneo ha tra i suoi quartieri il quartiere centrale, che si chiama infatti Cuneo Centro, che è diviso in diverse sezioni, una in particolare è adiacente alla stazione ed è quella più interessata dalle trasformazioni sociali negli ultimi anni. Direi che potrebbe interessare intorno alle 4.000 persone. Come residente ero già attivo nel comitato di quartiere prima che arrivasse il flusso importante di persone straniere ed ero già un cittadino attivo occupandomi insieme al resto del comitato di quartiere delle varie segnalazioni, dalla viabilità ai parcheggi alla manutenzione da fare in quartiere. Lo svuotamento di negozi di proprietà italiana ha svuotato gli spazi presenti, a cui è seguito una nuova gestione. Si tratta di persone straniere e sono coinvolte in diverse attività. C'è appunto l'esercizio commerciale che è tenuto per esempio da bengalesi, da marocchini, da sudamericani, da turchi.
Questa serata sarà una serata complessa perché sarà importante è doveroso utilizzare il linguaggio della verità. Questo sarà anche una serata di sfogo ed è importante valorizzare lo sfogo nel momento in cui la comunità si dice le cose come stanno.
L'obiettivo principale che ho provato a raggiungere è stato quello di muoverci in modo collettivo e compatto rispetto alle tematiche del cambiamento. La condizione economica sociale in cui si presenta l'individuo straniero in questa zona e la medesima nel resto d'Italia fa sì che il quartiere abbia anche subito gli impatti dell'arrivo di persone ai margini della società e che sono molto in contatto anche con alcune attività criminali. Spaccio su cui la società si è trovata molto molto impreparata.
Ma come ho pulito io quel bar lì e quel posto lì dai spacciatori, dai delinquenti, non mi hai mai dato nessuno i complimenti. Ho anch'io 3 bambine da tenere, devo fare una serata per guadagnare qualcosa.
Il quartiere è passato così da essere un quartiere conosciuto come un po' il salotto, dove le persone abbienti passeggiano per entrare nei bar a consumare, a un quartiere con una moltitudine di individui sicuramente molto meno abbienti rispetto a 20 anni fa e anche con origini, culture e provenienze differenti rispetto a quello a cui i cunesi erano abituati. La presenza di attività straniere ha però anche rappresentato tutta una serie di criticità per la comunità locale.
Tutte le sere io chiudo 11 e mezza, non vado oltre alle 5 del mattino. Lei pensa che io mi metto a lavorare tutti i giorni alle 5 del mattino quando ho 2 figli a casa e devo arrivare e alzarli al giorno dopo? Se avete problemi voi, abbiamo anche problemi noi.
La presenza di clienti che, stando davanti al locale, parlando a voce alta, hanno reso molto difficile la vita ad alcuni residenti, che ha generato forti criticità e la necessità di far presente sui giornali i momenti di tensione, forte richiesta di intervento alle forze dell'ordine. Il processo che abbiamo provato ad attuare qua in quartiere è stato quello di provare a incaricare gruppi di persone, inclusa quella straniera, a prendersi cura sia delle relazioni e sia dello spazio pubblico. Cercare di provare a mettere insieme questi fili rossi che non erano collegati e promuovere una leadership diffusa. Io non sono nato qua, mi sono trasferito qua nel 2018. Quello che vorrei per questo quartiere nel lungo periodo è un quartiere unico. Mi auguro un quartiere che assuma una sua identità, con un grado di convivenza che consente di digerire la diversità in maniera virtuosa.
Difficile? Quello è facile.
Stella heter jag. Jag kommer från Iran. Jag bor i Sverige ungefär 5,5 år. Efter en vecka vi flyttade till Svappavaara. Jättekallt. Och sen det var ingenting där. Så jag bodde inte så långt där i Svappavaara, bara en kort period. Så flyttade vi till Kiruna. Och kunde vi hitta jobb, jag och min man. Sen, det är kallt också. Det är mörkt så mycket. Men det var bra. Jag träffade Hej Främling. Hej Främling, det är en organisation som de jobbar med många aktiviteter. För att de tänkte att alla måste må bra. Psykiskt och fysiskt. Som när jag träffade Hej Främling, jag skulle säga att jag var inte må bra. För att jag kände mig så mycket ensam. Jag hade ingen kompis. Och så jag varit och jag träffade många människor som jag. De var ensamma eller de har inte så mycket kompisar där. Vi bara sitter, pratar med varandra, dricker kaffe. Och då jag tänkte, okej, det är fint. Sen vi har en annan aktivitet, vi dansar tillsammans. Det var en grupp av kvinnor, vi dansar tillsammans. Så jag var, yeah, det är igen, jag är på väg. Ska jag göra saker, kul saker med Hej Främling och mina kompisar eller mina vänner som jag känner då. Men det var en tjej som ledde den här gruppen. Hon sa att jag skulle flytta till en annan stad. Så tyvärr jag kunde inte komma och fortsätta den här aktiviteten. Och jag var, okej, nu jag ska bli ledsen. Vad ska jag göra? Kan jag leda den här gruppen? För att jag vill inte gå hem och sitta och göra ingenting. Och hon sa, absolut du kan göra det. Så jag började dansa med kvinnor. Och det var en jättecool grej. Jag kände mig, okej, jag gör någonting bra för mig själv och också med andra. Det var jättetrivs att bo i Kiruna. Jag kände mig, okej, bra, jag har saker att göra. Jag har jobb, jag har kompisar eller en grupp av tjejer som jag känner dem. Så vi träffar varje vecka. Det var jag tänkte, okej, bra. Plötsligt kommer tyvärr covid-19. Så börjar pandemi överallt. Så jag och min man båda var arbetslösa. Vi tänkte att okej, nu finns möjlighet att gå och flytta någonstans. Kanske lite varmare. Och sen jag har googlat på 3D maps under Google. Och jag sagt en gång Helsingborg. Och sen jag tänkte okej, det är en jättefin stad. Så varför inte? Vi kan flytta dit. Nu det är 1,5 år så jag och min man bor här i Helsingborg. Och jag tycker om jättemycket här. Väder är fint. Inte så kallt som Kiruna. Och jag har hittat många kompisar, nya kompisar. Också jag har flyttat mig från initiativtagare till inställd hos H2020. Och det är jättekul för mig. Idag vi har en aktivitet här. Det är varje torsdag.
Okay, welcome back, everyone, from the coffee break. I hope you had some great conversations out there, stimulated by what we were talking about in the opening session. We're now moving on to the next session, where we're going to hear about some of the experiences on the ground from the Whole-COMM communities. And then we're also going to have a policy roundtable where we talk about, again, how we can take these learnings that have been gleaned through this project and actually turn them into actionable policy that can make a difference. So now we're going to hear from the Whole-COMM project partners. I'd like to first turn the floor over to Ilka Adam from the Vrije Universiteit Brussels.
Hello. Not easy to kick off, but I was asked to give a short note on experiences from Belgium. Belgium was already talked about. We know that we talk about local experiences in Belgium, that there's not just one Belgium, and that immigrant integration policies have been devolved to the regions, and we have very different regional integration policies, immigrant integration policies, and that, of course, also impacts on what happens in the local authorities. Not only are there different policies, there's also very different political climates. While in Flanders, immigration is very politicized since the end of the 80s and the electoral success of the radical right-wing party, in Wallonia this is not the case. There's never been a really successful radical right-wing party. And now with the elections of the 9th of June, we have migration as one of the key electoral themes in the Flemish public sphere, while this is not the case in Francophone Belgium. So now let's move to how that impacts on the city. So in the small countries, we all studied 4 cases. We had 2 Flemish cities and 2 Walloons. It's small and medium-sized cities, no rural areas, because there is no diversity. It's mostly in the cities. Because of the different regional integration policies, local authorities have a different role. So in Flanders, the immigrant integration decree or regional law explicitly attributes a responsibility to the local authorities to coordinate immigrant integration, so to cooperate with all relevant partners, while in the Walloon case this is not so. There it's sub-regional integration centers, which are a kind of quasi-NGOs that are then subsidized by the government, which means that local authorities do not see it as their responsibility. So there's far more chance that you'll find an explicit policy in Flanders because of also this regional legislation and not in Wallonia, then also combined with a more universalist idea in the Francophone sphere where you should not do anything specific for migrants. It's mostly about socioeconomic issues and then we shouldn't address. While at the same time they now have compulsory integration policies, but it's not there's not so much out there. So this is the different context. Then talking about challenges, I'll pick one, because what came back everywhere and what is common for Belgium and many other European countries probably, but with specificities all over, is housing. Housing. And then that also shows that local authorities cannot necessarily solve everything. I mean, there's structural issues. It's about housing markets. I mean, you know in Belgium about the reception crisis. No, those who've been around in Brussels have seen tents for so long. There's maybe not tents anymore, but there's still this crisis that people are not given shelter when they apply for asylum, especially not the men. I mean, and this also, which makes, and then asylum procedures take so long. And when people don't have shelter, and then you have to start, okay, now you have to find a job. People have to first, find their spot in society. They've lived traumas through the travels, and by living on the streets or not finding shelter. So this is, first primary needs that need to tackle. But then, why is there this crisis? Of course, reception facilities have closed down. But then also, the asylum procedures take so long, so people stay in the reception centers. And then secondly, once you be recognized as a refugee, you don't find a house. So then people also sometimes stay on, but then they're kicked out maybe at a certain moment. But then after that, you have to find housing. In Belgium, social housing is only 7% of the market, while in the Netherlands it's 40, and in France it's 18. So we have also very little affordable housing available. Which then also creates the problem for people who are already recognized refugees. Then in Flanders, on the contrary of that, we only have so little social housing. There is now, I would call exclusion policies instead of inclusion or integration policies, in a sense that there's now given priority to local inhabitants who lived there for 5 or 10 years already, and then on top, because many researchers, Billy Martiniello being present from the sociology department, they do situation tests on discrimination on the housing market, makes it's already so difficult for them, and then they're not given. Their other, native of the village are given, or the cities are given priority, and also the whole allocation system has been changed in a discriminatory way, which before it was social needs that determine who gets priority, and now it's first come, first served. Those are social needs. So it has become an exclusion policy. So where to start with local integration policies when this issue is not solved? I can later talk on more hopeful issues, but I think it's important to set the structural conditions also. We talk about challenges. I think the positive messages come later, no?
Thanks a lot, Ilke. Let's next turn to Blanca Garces Mascareñas from CEDAW.
Thank you very much. I would like... I'm always very bad with microphones. I would like to raise the issue of irregularity, which is an issue in Spain and probably as well in Italy and particularly in other southern European countries. At the local level, the general picture of the 8 selected countries, the ones that we analyzed in Whole-COMM, is one, as Ilke said, with difficult access to housing due to the general housing crisis, and an easy access to employment due to general labor shortages. This, I would say, is one of the main conclusions of our project. It's evident, we all know about this crisis, housing crisis and labor shortages. This is common to all European countries. In this context, migrants' irregularity or legal precariousness, let's say, it's not just about irregularity, it's also about legal precariousness, so short-term residence permits, make even more difficult access to housing or to adequate housing, and also access to employment, particularly in northern European countries. In southern European countries, migrants' irregularity makes more difficult access to housing, but not per se more difficult access to employment. Still, as an irregular migrant, you can find a job, an irregular one, but this makes migrants more exploitable and more precarious. In this context, what's the role of local authorities in small, medium-sized towns and rural areas vis-à-vis the integration of these migrants with a more precarious status? I would say that, particularly from academia, we often have argued that local authorities or local governments are more inclusive than national governments, that their imperatives, their urgencies are others than those of national governments, particularly the ministries of interior. We have argued from academia that for local governments, social cohesion, access to the healthcare system, or access to an appropriate housing is important, not only for those affected, but also for the whole community, for social cohesion. But at the same time, and this links with what Ilke was saying, we see, and now I'm referring to the Spanish case, we see as well that local authorities compete among them to get the more wealthiest groups as residents and to get rid from the most vulnerable. And in the case of Spain, this is clear the case. And this is done through El Padrón. This is the local registration. According to a national law, this is a national law, all municipalities are obliged to register all residents in the municipality, regardless of their legal status. And all residents are obliged to register in their municipality. But what we see now is that those with a very precarious housing, for instance, renting a room in a shared apartment, are not able to register in this El Padrón, in this municipal census, basically because they don't have a formal address. They cannot show that they have an address. So they are not excluded because of their legal status, they are excluded due to their housing situation. And this means exclusion from the healthcare system, exclusion from education, and also the fact of not being able to regularize themselves after 3 years of residence. So many exclusions follow from not being registered in this municipal census. So this creates a problem for those that are excluded from the census, but also a problem between municipalities because they compete between them. And there are some municipalities, for instance, the case of Barcelona, that at the end attract all these vulnerable populations because these are the only ones, or Barcelona is the only city in the region that register people without having a clear formal address. So I would say that this is an example of how the multi-level government is fundamental, but not only in its vertical access, but in the horizontal one. Municipalities, local authorities at the regional level should coordinate together themselves in order to have a similar policy. And I would say that this policy cannot be others than inclusive, because these people, those without a legal status, but particularly without an adequate housing, a concrete formal address, some of them European citizens, won't disappear. They will be there. So again, I repeat, for them, but particularly in terms of social cohesion, access to healthcare, education, proper housing, it's fundamental for local authorities to include them, and for that, they should work together. I leave it here.
Thanks very much. Next, let's turn to Laila Haj Abdu from the European University Institutes.
Yeah, hello everyone from my side. Pleasure to be here. And I wanted just to say before I start that I don't present a single country or the findings of a single country, just as Blanca, who was in charge of coordinating the work on, or the research on housing. I was in charge of coordinating Work Package 5, and we speak in work packages, about social interactions and attitudes and experience of migrants. Just to say that you can put it into context. So, what's more strange? Remembering or forgetting, the wounds of the land, the distances traveled, relations lost, stories of histories unfold in rusted pain, and becoming strangers in a foreign land. Nights and days inheriting the same grief, seeding differences, lonely refugees, crying human, like monarch butterflies flying into a storm. This is a poem not by me, but by a person called Ritoranjan Gogoi. And you might wonder why I used this poem at the academic conference. Simply because it represents one of the main findings for me that we found in Whole-COMM when it's about social interactions, namely the aspect of loneliness, the lack of meaningful intergroup interactions and relationships. So I think you heard also partially from the others before that this was really one of the main striking results, that encounters in public spaces did not go beyond co-presence and transnational activities in many cases. When we started, we expected the degree of social interaction would differ across different types of localities, small versus bigger ones, more economically well off versus less off. But this was one of the striking things, that these types of localities really didn't do the job in explaining, because it was a more universal pattern which we found across all types of localities. And even not experience with prior migration did make here a huge difference, even though if we would have expected that. So, and I think what also is striking, of course, you always have a spectrum from very different experiences, but this so-called the silent majority, which was hold an indifference towards post-2014 migrants. So I just wanted to give you one quote from Italy, because again, thinking Italy might be a country especially open if you think of different types of regions, countries, and here that's why I chose the Italian one. So I quote, "I cannot say either they are good or bad. No one has ever done harm to me, and no one is my friend after 6 years. For sure, locals are not open. When we go out, they never talk to us." So again, I think this very nicely represents the silent majority and this indifference. And I think also another main finding from my work package is this complexity of integration dynamics, that it's not one variable which behaves in a simple way, but it's much more complex. Take the example of work. So you would assume having work fosters a positive experience in terms of integration, social interaction. So again, yes, of course, this was the case, but at the same time, we also observed that short-term loan work and so-called functional segregation, so people working different functions where they don't meet other locals or long-term residents, along this functional segregation along ethnic lines, where people did not interact. So I think that's one, if you take away one of the messages, is really that these variables always work in both ways. And also, I think what is important, we before spoke about the centrality of race. And of course, in my work packages, we saw that feeling of social isolation and lack of meaningful interactions were exacerbated in cases where migrants felt overt forms of discrimination and marginalization. And this was tied to visual difference. And I think one very important aspect, which we know from the public debate, but which our analysis again underlined, with the arrival of Ukrainians, there was a very strong awareness from migrants from non-European countries, such as Syria, Afghanistan, or Iraq, that refugees from Ukraine are differently treated than they are, or as one interview called them, Ukrainians are noble refugees. This feeling of being regarded as second-class migrants by both government institutions and local communities also created a sense of competition for scarce resources, such as Blanca already mentioned the housing issues, that this became, in the narrative also of the migrants we interviewed, much more type of competition with the Ukrainians when there was already a very dense housing market. Again, one issue that underlines that there is no simple story of integration, that it's complex and variables always work in both ways, is the temporal dimension. Again, when you think of it, you would expect the longer somebody stays in a community, the better will be the degree of social interaction, personal interactions. And again, this was also the case. But at the same time, we saw that there was also a contradictory dynamic occurring. So we can also see that in many localities that welcoming attitudes and the proactive support decreased. In some localities, a feeling of disillusionment about integration on both sides of the locals and the migrants emerged. And I think what was most striking was in Turkey, because this dynamic of this temporal dimension then manifested itself in increasing social tension and hostilities, as refugees were scapegoated for unemployment, economic deprivation, and scarcity of resources. Again, I want to quote here an interviewee from the Turkish case, who said, "It was very good when we first arrived. Right now, we are very worried that we will get a bad reaction from someone. That's why I do not go out much. I do not feel comfortable because we experience discrimination and racism when something happens and someone speaks Arabic." Just to highlight also again this complexity, and I will not delve now much into the other factors which we outlined, just one maybe, because the critical role of moderated spaces of interaction. Because just having a public space, even a nice park where you could sit, doesn't create interaction. You need to have moderated spaces where there is some kind of interlocutor or who organizes some kind of organizations. As a good example here, I want to mention the neighborhood houses in the Netherlands, which are not only there for migrants, but are open for everyone, which proved to be a good example. And here also, of course, volunteers were and are crucial. But again, integration is not that simple, because volunteers often were more elderly women, and the refugees were often much more younger, in many cases also male. So also having these friendships wasn't so easy, to have a meaningful interaction which really turns into something more long-term, such as friendship, wasn't there. We also mentioned much more structural factors, of course, and I think the colleague from the project also mentioned these dispersal mechanisms. It really depends. Does a person want to be there, or is he or she placed there? But also, of course, public infrastructure, which again points out to the funding issues. The legal status, not only legal status, which is obvious between irregularized or regular, but also where you come from, also determines your integration path, of course, according to European Union legislation and national ones. And of course, the system of reception in itself, does it offer opportunities? And I want to end here also with the walking tours Tiziana already mentioned, which were part of my work package. And I think the important thing is also in terms of how can you promote social interaction, social mixing, that, and what we were very keen of, that you don't focus on migrant issues, because this will only speak to the already, the ones who already engage with issues of migration, but we really deliberately chose the theme of change and made walking tours about the theme of change, because this affects everyone in a local community and in times of change, globalization, economic crisis. So you get to know the locality with fresh eyes, and change is also something very much inherent for people on the move. So bringing people together, creating similarities instead of reinforcing differences. Yeah, I'll end here. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now let's turn to Nahikari Irastorza from Malmö University in Sweden. It's behind your laptop there, sorry.
Thank you very much. So in Sweden, I'm going to give some examples from Sweden to illustrate this idea of indifference introduced by Leila. So in Sweden, migrants perceived they were treated with indifference by the local population as well. They felt like local people avoided getting personal with them and creating relationships. And I like to share one quote to illustrate this feeling. When I asked where the supermarket was, no one answered me. And one day, this the same person, she sent food to her neighbor, and the neighbor wouldn't take it. And she said, they were very scared, terrified. So there is also fear behind this indifference. And this indifference was manifested in different forms depending on the context. And I would like to talk about schools. So migrants expressed that when they arrived at school age, they were rarely invited to social events by Swedes. So this segregation at school is quite important because it tends to continue later in life in other spheres. So what happens at school has consequences later on in life. And this is quite important in countries like Sweden, where having the right contacts is crucial to getting a suitable job, for example. On a more positive note, migrants felt quite supported by people working in civil social organizations, NGOs, the church, and what could be translated as hobby associations in Sweden. So in Sweden, leisure is quite organized through associations. And this could be from a small book club to bigger sports associations. So everybody has the right to join. They are open. And it is in those associations where contact happens and relationships are established. And I would like to take a couple of minutes as well to share the findings of a survey that we conducted in Austria, Germany, Italy, and Sweden among 16,000 people, local residents, and this includes also migrants who had been living in those countries for more than 10 years. We asked in small towns, but also in bigger cities so that we could compare opinions. And we asked respondents about their opinions on the integration of refugees from outside Europe and also from Ukraine and their relationships with them. So overall, we found minor differences by size of municipality. The main difference between smaller towns and bigger cities was perhaps that people living in cities perceived the relationship with refugees from outside Europe as hostile to a greater extent compared to people living in smaller towns. In general, and as it was said before, opinions towards Ukrainians were consistently more favorable than in all four countries. Also, as mentioned by other colleagues, and this is perhaps, again, the most striking finding, between 40 and 60% of people said that they had almost no relationship with refugees. And finally, as I said, daily contact with migrants from outside Europe in this kind of sports and cultural activities, but not in other contexts like work or the neighborhood. This was very important to foster positive opinions on integration. And I'll stop here.
Thanks very much. Next, we go to Alina Jonitz from Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to talk about labor market integration, employment, because this was also seen as one of the main challenges. It was mentioned by both policymakers that we spoke to, employers, but also, of course, refugees and migrants that we interviewed. And what was interesting here is that we also asked respondents how they define successful integration, because we were also interested what their definition was. And here it was really striking that it was often defined in economic terms, as being employed, being self-sufficient, so very much also through this more utilitarian lens that we earlier also heard about. But at the same time, even though there was this very strong focus on employment and self-sufficiency, it was also stated as being one of the most difficult parts to actually facilitate more sustainable and long-term labor market integration. And this seemed particularly difficult in the two smaller cases and the rural areas where we conducted fieldwork in, and especially then also for refugees with a university degree and also particular professional experiences. There were limited job opportunities for example, and I just want to name a few of the professions of people I spoke to, doctors, chemical engineers, lawyers, sales managers, and also researchers. Instead, what they experienced is that they were often offered jobs in low-paid sectors. Here you can think of jobs as cleaner, DHL driver, temporary worker in big distribution centers where people would work for 3 months, 6 months, and then rotate again. In the agricultural sector, in the restaurant and service industry. Or people would find jobs that they deemed more adequate, also according to their professional and educational experience, but then these were often further away and required a lot of traveling, which was then again difficult for people who didn't have a driver's license, for instance, or also for families, and in particular women also with young children. And this also led then to considerations to also potentially try and leave the municipality because of this lack of economic opportunities. But it also, and yeah, it clearly also conflicted, of course, with people's personal aspirations, but it also challenged municipal officers, other stakeholders, work coaches to find adequate jobs, because they also couldn't always change the availability of the local labor market. And at the same time, these local officials also told me that they experienced a lot of pressure more from the political level, also due to the specific national legal framework in place, where a lot of focus is indeed put on labor market integration and participation, and ideally as soon as possible. So there were also these conflicting interests there. Of course, we also identified additional obstacles, including, that it was not always as easy to have a diploma recognized, for instance. Discrimination, of course, is a big problem. And there was also a lot of unwillingness by local employers to hire refugees in paid positions, long-term. So there was a lot of focus more on this, maybe hiring a refugee or taking on a refugee as an intern and then terminating the contract after a while, or having refugees work there as volunteers, but then once negotiations about potential payment for the same position would come into play, people were often told that they were okay as volunteers, but their language skills or the qualification was not sufficient to actually being properly paid for that. That was one of the key issues I wanted to highlight. I'm not sure if I already should go into some recommendations, or because what we saw, or what, based on these insights, we would argue that it is indeed crucial to consider also people's aspirations and long-term career plans already when thinking of also national and local strategies in terms of labor market integration. And this is what we saw also in 2 municipalities, like it can really help to sort of also map out a potential plan as to how people could actually reach their droombaan, so their dream job. And perhaps this means that they initially start in a position that doesn't 100% align where they would like to be, but it is maybe a position where they could already practice the language, acquire certain skills, and then move or switch to a job later on that aligns more with their personal aspirations. And very importantly, these shouldn't then be jobs I heard from one person who worked as a cleaner or as a DHL driver where they had zero contact with other people. So this idea of employment equals better integration and learning the language automatically didn't really come true for a lot of people. So this is why I would like to share a story of one woman I recently spoke to again. I interviewed her 2 years ago, and now I met with her again to also understand a bit what happened in her life. And she now told me that actually with the help of a local stakeholder, she also now found a job as a teaching assistant because she would like to become a teacher later on. And she says, okay, it's not quite yet where I want to be, but I know that this particular job as an assistant will help me to eventually get where I would like to be in the future, perhaps in 4 to 5 years. And really take these considerations into account by mapping also out a plan. This is something that we found was quite helpful also for refugees. And of course, to also engage local employers much more, raise awareness, sensitize for the topic, and perhaps also take other labor market actors on board who are very familiar with the context as well, such as trade unions, for example, who are very aware of employers' needs and concerns and could also come into the picture and really help facilitate collaboration and dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And finally, we have Isabella Skrivenek from Danube University, Krems.
Thank you very much. Just about the microphone.
I think it's okay now.
It's okay? Okay, good. Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to share with you 3 key findings from the Austrian cases that we studied. Basically, we studied 4 cases in 2 Austrian provinces, covering on the one hand the western and the eastern part of the country. These were the provincial capital of Tyrol, Innsbruck, and a small municipality in Tyrol, as well as the provincial capital of Lower Austria. This is St. Pölten, and a small municipality in Lower Austria. And the first point I would like to stress is that there is a relevant difference in the governance arrangements between the studied medium-sized and small town on the one hand, and the small municipalities on the other hand. And this had important implications as both cities, so to say, were involved in institutionalized forms of interactions that also address integration, and they are considered as actors simply due to their size, while this was not the case or is not the case for the 2 small municipalities. And this was important then in response to the inflows of 2015 in Austria, as the 2 cities could participate to some extent in the development of policy responses after 2015, or it had at least some access or better and earlier access to information, whereas the small municipalities were primarily facing the impact of decisions taken at higher levels. And for this reason, I would like to underscore the project's recommendation to extend the scope of multi-level coordination mechanisms also to small and medium-sized towns, and particularly also small municipalities, and to take into consideration their needs and opportunities. This brings me then to my second point and key finding from Austria relating to the role of civil society, including ordinary citizens. And this regards 3 aspects. First of all, civil society was important in some instances due to lacking of few public measures available at the local level. And in terms of discussions and observations about pro- and anti-migrant mobilization, one important finding from Austria is that just participating in pro-migrant support activities can be already taking a stand on the issue. So it's not active pro-migrant mobilization on the street, but what was mentioned by interviewers, just taking a stand on the issue is already just participating in such support activities as providing clothes or helping with the language and such things can be or are perceived in a local community as taking a stand on the issue. And this can be challenging in a climate that is already skeptical and hostile. And this brings me to the third aspect in terms of the role of the civil society in regard to funding. The availability of small funds can be already relevant and important for such initiatives. And we have it in the overall project recommendations in regard to funding and also accounting for small localities. And here I want to bring in that also EU funding can play a role in this context if local level, regional level or national level funding is not available or not available anymore, then EU level funding could be some opportunity to replace these missing funds from other levels and sources. And the third dimension I would like to address just briefly. It has already been introduced by Ilke and mentioned across the panel. It is housing. It is also a challenge raised by interviews in Austria in the regard that overall access to housing can be more difficult than access to the labor market. And this concerns high rents, limited supply, also the lack of public housing or lacking access to public housing for some groups of migrants and refugees, alongside discrimination and language barriers. And what I think is important to consider that integration and integration policy is a cross-sectional issue that involves and depends on generic policy domains. So it's again complex and challenging, but really a dimension, a structural dimension that also was stressed in our case studies. And related to that, there are some kind of impacts that newly arrived migrants live in poorer neighborhoods or buildings of poor conditions. And we have also secondary movements, so people move elsewhere. And it's yet little understood, but prominent in political debates, this kind of movements, and including discussions about differences in welfare levels between the provinces in Austria. So to conclude here with housing, it's a general policy challenge to ensure affordable housing for all, not only migrants, but also longer-term residents and locals, and to avoid segregation. And I'll leave it to you for the time. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Isabella, for giving us the Austrian experience there. Before opening it up to the audience, I just want to get one or two real takeaways of best practice that we could take away from all of your research and your involvement in terms of what's really working and what can be used as a recommendation. Ilke, you mentioned that you have an uplifting tale for us, maybe?
I thought we first had to talk about the challenges, but I mean, there are many uplifting tales, but when talking about best practices, I think what we also realized is that you cannot just transfer them like that. They're born in a certain context. So, I mean, what has often been given by us as a good practice is this one-stop shop moderated space that also Leila referred to I mean, in the city of Leuven in Flanders, where you have the Nomade. It's a kind of welcome house, reception house. They brought all the actors together where you can find all information that you need. And a few days ago, I was talking to actually a colleague, a lecturer from Palestine, but who's an asylum seeker here. And I was like, what is the ideal welcome package for you? And I said, I mean, having all the information in one place is very important, but also civil society can organize these spaces. There's information sessions, there's exchange that can happen. But okay, this happens in the city of Leuven, one of the little cities where you have a mayor of migrant origin. His parents were labor migrants from Morocco. Of a left-wing party. It's a university city where you have a lot of international students and highly skilled population. So we were in this local workshop with other cities. There are cities around Brussels, a bit further away, but where you have easy access to public transport that increasingly diversify. but where there's a lot of political resistance then. So, I mean, I'm always a negative one today. I start my uplifting story, but you have to be really realistic with best practices. And so if you want to transfer then, so what was interesting is then these city local officers that really wanted to do something similar in the different cities. How can we do that? And the Leuven people said, yeah, but the space is cheap, and everybody wants to come. Nobody is paid to come there. The labor office comes there. But then in another space, it becomes very politicized to open this space, especially for a particular group. So then maybe you have to depoliticize it. I think you can adapt these with a lot of will from civil society, maybe external funding, not from the local authorities even, from Europe, who knows. You can possibly do similar things in a very different setting, and you have to be a bit strategic then on how to do that, I guess so.
One thing that came up a lot with all of you was this question of indifference. And in particular, Lely, you had the story about somebody saying, I've never experienced an aggression, but I've also never experienced a friendliness. This question of people just kind of going out of their way, seemingly, to ignore migrants. I wonder if any of you have a positive story specifically about overcoming that indifference, because we have this example of moderated spaces, where you kind of foster people to actually overcome that indifference. Do any of you have a particular story, uplifting story about overcoming that? Yeah.
Sorry, perhaps not a particular story, but I think it's also, again, very important to highlight the great job that some associations are doing in bringing people together, people who are interested in a shared activity, hobby, sports, whatever it is. And in these spaces, newcomers and long-term residents often participate on whatever they are interested in equal terms, and relationships can be established. These associations often don't have the financial means to do a lot, so I think it is very important, because it has been repeated, and we've seen this in different countries, to acknowledge this and also to support this kind of initiatives.
Yeah, I just want to make a more broader comment, because I think from everything we study, we also have to think about broader global changes and challenges. And I think I spoke a lot about this issue of social interaction and loneliness. And I think we live in a society with more and more demographic aging, but also how we live, that loneliness has become an issue for many segments of the society. When I lived in the UK, they appointed a minister for loneliness. I don't know how much he has achieved, but I just wanted to bring this also, point this out. And I think also this social mixing is really find something that has a common purpose. And I just want to tell a story that isn't from Whole-COMM, but I think it's representative of this idea how to achieve social mixing and a common purpose. I read it in a book, actually, from a researcher so there was an issue in Berlin about housing. They wanted to or to get free this housing, to have it for the private rental market, right? And then there was this woman, a Turkish woman, who said she will kill herself if she announced it and put it out if they throw her out. And then that the neighbors and the residents became aware of that. And then another woman, like an extremely religious Muslim woman, and an anarchist punk also came together, and other people like from the different walks of life, and they helped her, and they made a protest camp about this issue. And over time, they really transformed the life of everyone. All of these people were isolated individuals, not really necessarily accepted, but very different, with which you would see from the surface, no common values whatsoever. Punk and anarchist with a very devoted Muslim, but they bonded and they made these friendships. And I think it's a very nice episode how you can see how over a common purpose, which isn't specific a migrant issue, but which really reunites people like this housing issue, I think that's a good example to bear in mind how to find purpose in a society like ours.
Another theme that came up consistently was housing. Several people mentioned housing, and I thought it was an interesting point. I forget actually who mentioned it, but that in one particular social housing project you had migrants that were largely young men, and then it was open to everyone, but everyone else seemed to be older women, I think was the point. And so it was hard actually, yes, it was Elke, I think. Or no, it was Leila. But that doesn't necessarily foster friendship. So what would be the way to design housing policies in a way that you don't get the segregation, that you get more mixing, but also keeping in mind that neighbors don't necessarily talk to each other, right? So just putting people next to each other to live together doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be friends, right? Is there a way to design it so you actually can, at the same time, encourage more community between people? Open to anyone who wants to take it. Yeah.
So bad. Yeah, thank you. I would say that before talking to each other, it's key to ensure access to housing. And this access to housing is more and more problematic. First of all, because public policies may restrict this access to public housing, for instance, to those that just arrived. And then there is another issue, which I think it's really important, and we haven't talked about it yet, is racial discrimination. And this, we found racial discrimination in all our local cases, was mentioned by all kinds of interviewees, stakeholders. This is key. It's key to access employment, but particularly to access housing. Because employment, if there are labor shortages, discrimination is less relevant because they are needed. But for housing, this is fundamental. So I would say before asking ourselves how to foster these exchanges, this talking with each other, I would say that discrimination is an issue. It's not a surprise. We all know that racial discrimination is an issue. What it's surprising is that most localities, local authorities, did not tackle this issue. Most localities did not have particular policies or measures, initiatives to raise and to tackle this, while this is one of the biggest barriers to access housing. We found, because you were asking about best practices, a locality here in Belgium that did have an initiative to measure racial discrimination in the housing market. We had another locality in Catalonia where there was a social organization that launched a program to measure that, and the conclusion was so clear that this was the case in by most housing agencies. So here I would say, before asking ourselves how to promote these exchanges between neighbors, all kinds of neighbors, not only those newcomers, because I think that, as you said, Leila, very well, this is broader, goes broader. I think that this is an issue we should discuss and should be really tackled at the local level. Yeah.
Maybe I can give a small example from the Netherlands. So as a small disclaimer, we primarily in our project in the Netherlands looked at recognized refugees, so those with a status who had already moved to the municipalities. But still, what is interesting is that they all get housing, so they don't have to look for housing for themselves. It's not always easy, and there is a big delay also due to a severe shortage of social housing and affordable housing. But once they're assigned to a municipality, the municipality is in charge to provide a first housing, at least to refugees, those with a status, importantly. What was interesting here is that, and there we also saw some local differences, but to name a best practice is that sometimes, or in one of the municipalities in particular, there was a local housing corporation who took on a very active role in that. So they would specifically go talk to the neighbors, tell them, okay, there will be new neighbors coming now, we will be organizing a barbecue or all kinds of other activities. So they also did not see themselves, and that was different from other local housing corporations, as, okay, we provide housing, that's it. But they really also, in collaboration with the municipality and other societal actors, took on this more active role to really try to facilitate contact between those who already lived for a long time in the neighborhood and those who were fairly new. And this was very practical information on how do I fix my heating if there is something, who do I have to call, how does it work with potential waste separations, very hands-on information, but also this more societal or softer aspect of creating a sort of cohesion between residents in the neighborhood.
Yes, I wanted to come back to this issue of racism and discrimination. As I said in the survey, we found that attitudes and opinions were clearly more positive towards Ukrainians compared to refugees from non-European countries. And so also it was explained by our colleagues at MPG that we found a correlation between municipalities who had good integration or any integration policies at the local level. So those who had such policies, opinions were also better in those municipalities. So this is something to consider. So policies perhaps matter to reduce, to improve attitudes, opinions, but they should also consider racism and discrimination for sure. So good management of policies, migration and integration policies might help also reduce such opinion, improve the opinions.
We have to wrap up. I just want to check if there's a question from the audience. Does anyone in the audience have a question? Okay, then go ahead. Ilka, you wanted to say something.
No, I just wanted to build further on the situation testing that is used as a method then to measure discrimination. You send two people with similar profiles. The only difference is that they're racialized or not. I mean, we have experts sitting here. So, I mean, in several, there has been research done then in Flemish and Belgian cities to measure that, but then you create, I'm really repeating the work of Billy Martiniello here, you create awareness then, but creating awareness is of course not enough. It can be a first step. So, I mean, in the city of Ghent, then, I mean, which is not Whole-COMM because it's a too big city, they also used it, I mean, you can use it to punish also. And, I mean, apparently already the awareness of maybe then the punishment, so I'm not aware of these details, really decreased the discrimination. I mean, the thing is, in the 80s, for example, here in Belgium, we had these posters. I mean, and you apparently have it also in other cities in Whole-COMM. I mean, no migrant hiring or explicitly. Then we had the European anti-discrimination legislation from 2000. So it continued, but it became covered. So these tools can help to decrease it. Maybe then they're still more inventive afterwards. Yeah, but it's an important first step, especially since what we saw in Whole-COMM is, I mean, at the European level, integration is defined as a two-way process. It comes, I mean, there's migrants apparently who have to do things, but there's also the society, which is anti-discrimination policy. And apparently, in the 49 cities, hardly any have anti-discrimination policies. So that responds to that front, only on the housing front. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to add on this axis of discrimination that also, like, I was also, in one of my prior lives, I was also a worker, refugee support worker, and when searching for flats also there is this economic issue, because if refugees get social support from the state, then landlords were hesitant, because this is that not necessarily because out of racial concerns, even those who were very well-minded, but then they were frightened if the rent will come in on a regular basis. So I think, again, labor market integration and bringing people to self-sufficiency plays in. And another thing I wanted to say to your question about the housing issues. So again, here I think we more highlighted the access rather than the interaction. It was more about the labor market, but I also wanted to say this takeaway is like that integration is anything but simple, and the variables, because, and this we know not only from our research, but from lots of prior research, that like call it segregation if you want, but that also then these social networks help a lot, and they help people in finding a job, getting access, so in these first steps. So like also this policy narrative that of we have to avoid segregation has to be much more differentiated, because it can also be a resource, an opportunity, what we know from lots of research. So again, it's not as simple as it sometimes is portrayed in public debate.
Well, we'll have to wrap up the local experiences panel there, but thank you to all of you for some really interesting insights and observations. How about a round of applause for them? So now I'd like to welcome the participants on the Policy Perspectives Roundtable up here to the table. So now we're going to really dive into the policy here, particularly from the perspective of regions. One thing that certainly people are well aware of here at the Committee of Regions is that Europe's situation in terms of the powers of regional and local governments varies immensely by country, by member states. We have some federal countries in the European Union where states have a lot of power, towns have a lot of power. We have other more centralized unitary states like France, for instance, where regions don't have that much power. So when we're talking about policy options at regional level, it all depends on what those regions can do, and that really depends on the country. So to give us more perspective on that, we're now going to get a presentation of the Committee of the Regions Integration Network and its best practices. So I'd like to introduce Dace Vinovska and Pablo Herreros Torre from the European Committee of the Regions, Cities and Regions for Integration Initiative. I'll leave it up to Pablo or Dace if you'd like to start.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present our networks, that is Committee's Network for Cities and Regions on Integration of Migrants. It was established in 2019, and until this moment it has been expanded, and we have more than 160 cities and regions, as well as our institutional partners with whom we collaborate. And our purpose or our objective is to bring these cities and regions together to help to build capacity, and as well provide the space and platform for exchanging for best practices that serve for endorsing this bottom-up approach for building our policies on integration and inclusion of migrants. Actually, here you can see our map and our institutional partners. And what I would like to emphasize that actually our motto is very much related to building inclusive communities. Our main objective is to achieve the social cohesion, and as well shows that cities and regions can have a voice and impact on EU legislative matters and also EU policies. And by organizing different type of events like roundtable discussions, seminars, and as well like capacity building events, we encourage cities and regions to come up and share their best practices, but also to be more involved in collaboration with different EU institutions and inspire even EU policymakers for more innovative policies and more open and progressive policies for inclusion of migrants in local communities. And being active in this field, I would like to emphasize that we call for multi-level governance that brings together local, national, and EU level. And as well, we are advocating for fair and effective implementation of new pact on migration and asylum that respects human rights and basically is also taking into account the needs of regional and local activities, authorities, and ensures successful integration on the ground. And of course, as we all know, as it is emphasized in the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, a successful integration is an essential part of well-managed migration and asylum policies. Therefore, we very much would like to connect this integration aspect with building social cohesion and inclusive growth. And of course, for being capable to do it, we advocate also for greater support to local and regional authorities in their work on integration and inclusion, and also for easier access and more direct access to funding for implementation of their projects. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleague, Pablo, who will shortly introduce you with some best practices that we have in the field of the labor market integration. And we chose these practices, among others, because labor market integration is one of the key factors for successful inclusion. And as well, it's not only about successful inclusion into local society, it brings also opportunity for self-fulfillment, for more independence, for learning more about local community, about traditions, and also feeling that person who is a new arrival becomes more and more part of the local community. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dace, and thank you everyone for being here. Basically, we would like to present you briefly 3 initiatives of the Integration Initiative of the Committee of the Regions, and as researchers in contact with many local and regional authorities for your project, we invite you to transmit the idea for them to join and try to build more inclusive communities. So the first best practice we have is from the Basque Country region in Spain, and we have a representative here with us of the office of the region. It was started as a pilot program in 2020 with a reduced scope, but since then it has expanded through the entire region of the Basque Country, and now is part of the Basque Social Pact for Migration, even getting funding of the European Social Fund. The approach, or the main goal, would be to create personalized and comprehensive processes to accompany a youngster aged between 18 and 25 years old in their transition to adulthood. Not only migrants, but also locals without family support. So there we see that important factor of intergroup interaction and socialization that we have mentioned, you have mentioned here before, and that is quite important for a successful integration. In terms of the approach, we are talking about a whole of society, whole of community approach that is materialized in a one-stop shop mechanism from where many different services are provided, starting by housing, as we have talked here before, but also employment, career guidance through the entire employment integration, labor market integration trajectory. And that is driven by 3 key principles that are a coordination between different departments of the Basque Country government and the provinces within the Basque Country, then cooperation with the third sector, 26 NGOs specifically, and also with private partners, and then the principle of co-responsibility. As since the start, the participants have to sign a rights and obligation agreement that not only gives them agency, but empowers them over their transition towards adulthood and their trajectory in integration. In terms of the impact, our member of the Integration Initiative has reported that only in 2023 the program has accompanied 606 individuals, with 206 finishing the program and with a success rate of 72%, which is quite high. Then the second best practice we would like to share, also regional, would be Bremen and Bremen-Havener Integration Network. This is a program that was created by the Red Cross and their partners, and that is mainly focused on the labor market integration with a 3-fold goal. First, to help asylum seekers and refugees to overcome the administrative burdens as soon as they arrive, but also to integrate in the labor market. To do that, they basically consider the regional labor market demands in close contact again with the partners of the private sector, but also with public employers, and also the best practices they already have in-house in their businesses to integrate the migrants. With the outcomes and the success of the program, they learn from it, and what they are doing is develop better and improve, so to say, the strategies that they already have in place. In terms of the approach, it's again an individualized and personalized approach with a holistic set of services that they provide, mainly, as I said before, focusing on the labor market, but also, as we can see in the slide, they provide advice on residential, labor law, and social law. In terms of the impact, our member has reported that they are now at the regional level but actually designing a welcome center where to centralize all those services and even provide more. So we can see there a change of paradigm in the regional authority from a labor market focused integration towards a more whole of society kind of approach where other stakeholders would come in that center and provide services. And finally, and briefly, a third example, this time local. We are talking about Riga, the capital of Latvia. When the full-scale war of aggression of Russia started against Ukraine, the Riga local authorities thought about this refugee support center for Ukrainians with the aim of helping 40,000 Ukrainians to integrate into the local community. The approach, again, one time more, is this one-stop agency from where many a diverse range of services are provided, from integration to assistance in knowing and getting the different subsidies or benefits the new arrival and newcomers can get. And also, again, we see the principle of cooperation with the third sector, with the NGOs, which is quite important to achieve that buy-in and engagement from the host community, as you have all proved through your research, right? In terms of the impact, we can see that there was an educational effect, quite interesting in the local community, because the member of the Integration Initiative has reported that many locals have come to know about municipal services they weren't aware until then. Also, it has incentivized the local authority to create an information website in European Union languages, but also in non-European Union languages to help overcoming the language barrier to the newcomers, which we know it can be quite a problem at the start. And then one flagship that has been quite successful is the organization of a regular job fairs, 22 until now, presenting 4,500 vacancies and helping 1,500 Ukrainians to find job, to emancipate, and to make a life of their own and sustain themselves in Riga. Apart from that, the success of this best practice has managed to make the center to get funding from private partners, but also from the US Embassy, for example. And thanks to that, in 2023 and 2024, they've managed to provide language courses, but also psychological assistance. And overall, the success of this story has incentivized the local authority to go from targeting only Ukrainians to targeting any other refugee and asylum seeker. So overcoming that kind of targeting only this sort of noble migrants, as we were hearing before, that you have found in your research. So from the initiative, we would like to point out that whole of community approach, the importance and the success we are seeing, thanks to your research, and thanks also to some of the local politicians that are already really working to build a more humanist and inclusive Europe, so to say.
Thanks very much. So next, let's turn to Anna Piccini from Sciences Po Paris, who can give us some of the policy perspectives on everything we've heard so far.
Thank you, Dave. And thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here today at the end of this journey. I was lucky enough to see the project developing since its beginning. And a lot has changed in what we know now about local approaches to migration and to integration since I first started working on this issue, which was back in 2017, when at the OECD we had to make the case for adopting a local lens to integration policies. And we did it by breaking down data on migrants integration at the NATS2 level, at the regional level. And that's where we observed that between different regions, there were very different stories. And also there was a story between metropolitan and non-metropolitan area in terms of presence and in terms of integration outcomes. Today we come to a whole other layer of understanding and analysis. Thanks to this research, first we shift the focus to places that we're not so used to hear about. And second, we use many different lenses, not just the statistical integration outcome, not just the policy analysis and mechanism lens. We also try to tell other stories, even if they're hard to hear, as the stories that today we hear about indifference, about solitude. I'm very grateful to bring back that human aspect, because we always tend to forget it in policy or academia circle. So beside the bad news, we also heard good news. We heard from your results that when in municipalities that pick up integration policies, the environment becomes less hostile, which strengthened what we found back then in 2017, that in opinion polls, the presence of migrants was considered as positive in places where migrants were more present. So that all points to a learning curve of living together, institutions and civil societies, and society as a whole. What I would like to point to focus my intervention on is on agile multi-level mechanism that we came across. And because I think this responds to one of the challenges that was highlighted, which is to overcome the small weight that sometimes these small cities, medium and rural areas have on this multi-level mechanism. I will start from one mechanism that was back then in 2015, when we studied in 2017, still experimental in Austria. And that was a mechanism established by the Federal Chamber of Commerce, the Employment Service, and the office in charge of integration and the dispersal mechanism. So they were trying to ask themselves the question of where the refugee asylum seeker skills will better match the needs of territories that were facing job shortages. So try to have this smart orientation and talking to local authorities, putting in place at the same time funding, but also structuring this matching mechanism with a mentoring mechanism on place, which was meant to accompany asylum seekers and refugees into their new work environment. Why I think it is important? Because it will probably also enable find this convergence of interest. The asylum seekers arriving in localities where there is an identified need will immediately more appreciate the presence. We heard in November when we were here from one of the representatives of a municipality in East Germany, how in his town, 1/3 of business shut down because they couldn't find anyone taking over. So clearly there is this need of matching skills, matching arrival with the needs of these places. How this could be, and probably also to overcome something that we heard from Elina about the short contracts, the unpaid contracts that give probably the opportunity for people who arrive to a place and invest a lot in their integration to find a job, but not the job that will eventually give them opportunities for increased salary, have access to better housing, have access to healthcare for him and his family, which eventually will join. So to make sure that this matching between the localities is also sustainable over time, we probably should identify since the beginning what are the real needs and what are the competences of the people who arrive. Where this could be more, how can be this translated into action? There are potentially some opportunities. Now there is the implementation plan for the Migration and Asylum Pact. Whether such mechanism for for enabling matching between the needs of the solidarity mechanism that will be implemented and specific needs of the local places, but also to strengthen capacity across the level of government to put in place this agile multi-level mechanism. Maybe governments could address the technical support instruments of the reform, which can be addressed by both sides, local authorities as well as national authorities in charge of management of migration and integration. The second example I would like to bring up, I will be very short, is to respond to another challenge that was highlighted in the report, is the lack of ownership that you found in some municipalities. Management of asylum seekers, refugee center was outsourced by the national authorities to quasi NGO. So what happened at the moment of recognition of refugees is that local authorities often don't feel in charge of this, or they don't have the capacity or resources. Now, France has tried to find an answer from the national level to this challenge in those localities that recognize an interest in keeping the recognized refugees but don't have the means or the capacity to do so. The national authority in particular is the Interministerial Delegation for Asylum, Integration and Reception, signs territorial contracts with metropolitan areas or with districts, including peri-urban municipalities, including rural municipalities, that through those contracts find the means to continue the support that was until then given by the central state dispersal mechanism. Support that could, for instance, help the local localities paying the rents for finding housing solution in the private market, or supporting local mechanisms for integration in the labor market and continuing with the language courses. So I just wanted to point to this small-scale, agile mechanism that very often don't make it to the news, very often are implemented in parallel with much more restrictive pushback policies at the national level, but they still bring us some ideas that could maybe be brought up or sustained also through the support at the EU level. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna. And finally, let's turn to Prachi Metawala, who is from the United Cities and Local Governments.
Hello everybody. Yes, I'm Prachi Metawala from United Cities and Local Governments. So we are a world network of local and regional governments comprising of more than 2,500,000 members, local and regional governments, LRG members across 7 world regions. And I am the Human Mobility Officer there. Human mobility is the term we use over migration so as not to create silos amongst the very mixed migration flows that we receive in cities. We are not Frontex. Mayors are not interested in knowing the reasons for why migrants are arriving, but they have already arrived. So, and I myself am the in-house migrant at UCLG, so I would here speak from like this, both the double caps. So, speaking about the first elephant race in the previous panel, housing, right? So, this is extremely personal again. It's my experience as a migrant in Barcelona, because in true story, in 2022, I got displaced. In a way, I moved out of my house to make way for my flatmates' Ukrainian family to arrive. And that year, I stayed in 6 different houses. Throughout my house search, which was like more than 30 houses that I visited, I encountered a lot of racial discrimination myself. So many thanks again to the ladies who brought up the issue of racial discrimination. And while this is there, the issue, again, Barcelona, the city of Barcelona is making a lot of advancements on securing more and more social housing, but what needs to be done is that migrants need to be part of the housing plan, not just in Barcelona, but all cities. Migrants need to be on that list for the quotas for social housing, not just the vulnerable urban poor, which already resides there. And the local authorities have an important role here because they also need to regulate on what kind of requirements are public, private real estate agencies or the landlords requesting of the migrants who are seeking housing, like what kind of papers are actually required and what is an extra. For instance, I would, speaking of practices, because we work a lot, we handhold, in my line of work at UCLG, we handhold through peer exchange and multi-stakeholder policy labs, a lot of cities which are interested in developing migrant and refugee-friendly actions in their cities. And we worked with cities that have in place comprehensive municipal migration councils, just the city of Sao Paulo, to cities with a very low level of decentralization, like Rabat, for instance, but they use projects such as Enabel, for instance, from the Belgian Development Agency, to actually investigate deficits that migrants are facing in accessing the labor market there, which is the other point, labor market. But coming back to housing, I would also like there's a big shout out also to the city of Poitiers in France, which recently developed an action to enable the access of irregular migrants to housing in their city. And now moving to the point of isolation, right? Yes, migrants are isolated, cities are isolated from other cities which are working on migration. And cities are also very isolated from regions and the national federal governments working on this issue, and then the UN, for instance. So what we do at United Cities and local governments is also we co-steer a very important partnership called the Mayor's Mechanism, and through which we have launched this initiative called the Call to Local Action for Migrants and Refugees, where we consolidate promising practices and recent relevant practices, that's the local practices in place that support migrants and refugees in cities. Like it was Annalise who raised this point. How do we, give more visibility to this promising experiences, the positive experiences we have had? So what we try to do is we have also practices from intermediary and small cities, such as from Greece we have Heraklion, then there's Larissa, Moldova, Straseni, and in Romania, Brasov, for instance. And what we also beyond that, we try to bring these best practices and also the technical staff, municipal representatives and mayors and governors who are involved in implementing them to the UN, to match them to the right fora, the Global Forum for Migration and Development, the International Migration Review, the Global Refugee Forum, because that's also important in a way to then go from local to the UN, and then to come from the UN to make links with the national government, and then to have the national government actually pay heed and include and augment maybe the mandates that local governments have in migration governance. And moving from here, also what we do is connect LRGs to migrant associations. So this is the last part, whereby we have the Lampedusa Charter, which is a municipalist charter for dignified human mobility and territorial solidarity on it, which was endorsed, the drafting process involved over 300 municipalities. And now we are implementing the Lampedusa Charter Policy Labs, because the charter is very political, but we also want to implement the priorities that municipalities put forth in it. And to do so, we are connecting the local governments to migrant organizations. We organize these policy labs on varied thematics, where we gather the migrant organizations, civil society associations, international organizations, think tanks, and academia to discuss on one specific issue and how to implement policy action in their territories on that issue. So I think that's also important. And lastly, moving from policy to practice. As you probably guessed, I'm not a policy officer, but I work a lot with city practices. So I would like to give a shout out to some very good, promising practices which have been developed. For instance, there is the city of Terrassa in Spain, which is imparting Darija language courses to educators in their city, so that, because as mentioned earlier, integration is not one way. It's also from the city, the communities with the host communities to the migrants. And hence this is a very promising practice so that now the host also speaks the language of the migrants for a change, right? And then there is rematch. So many of us, we spoke about matchmaking, which is very much needed. So rematch is a project of German municipalities, not from our network, but from partners, where German municipalities where they're already matchmaking in advance with Ukrainian asylum seekers. So this is facilitated by Moving Cities, I think, which is matchmaking in advance the needs of asylum seekers and the capacities available within the interested municipalities, so that they can have a planned settlement, which is very promising. And lastly, coming back to housing, which is close to my heart, is the issue of camps. Because a lot of migrants and refugees are living in camps and in unsanitary, unhygienic conditions, and they shouldn't be, right? They should have a right to the city. And here, I just heard of this practice last week by 22 Catalan municipalities, the SIGIM refugee project, it's called, and they are municipalities against camps. So within their cities, they are conducting exhibitions of how the situations in camps actually are, for their communities to be more sensibilized on these issues in the first place. So that is it. Thank you. And we also, please get in touch. The practices that were shared here today, especially the MPG toolkit, it's very interesting, and we would love to collaborate in some manner. Don't be isolated.
Thanks very much, Prachi. Let me check with the audience. Do we have any questions for the panelists? No? Okay, so I just had a very quick follow-up question for you, Pedro. I wanted you to... yes. Yes, go ahead.
Just very quickly, with relevance to housing, I wonder whether, access to banking or bank accounts, whether it's something that is also relevant when it comes to accessing decent housing.
I think Blanca would be able to address that better, but seeking housing, yes, you need to have a bank account. You need to have the padrón, which is the registration within the municipality. And you also need to have a job contract. So labor and housing is intertwined.
Just quickly, Pedro, I wanted you to... Pablo, sorry. So Prachi's point about having a quota for migrants in social housing, is that something you guys came across in the COR integration network? Do you have any feeling of how common that is? Either you could take it.
Well, actually, I cannot report directly on that. Our members haven't talked yet about any quota on migrants, which is not something we can be proud of for the moment, but probably some of the local initiatives they have.
Yes, thank you so much. indeed, local and regional authorities have this comprehensive overlook on different aspects of community, and therefore we are sharing the practices that they have in place. And most of the time, there are also many challenges they face. And for instance, to reply on this question, we would need to involve more like local and regional authorities, because we are the network that connects and gives a platform for exchanging and building activity. Therefore, it would be, what we do in our daily basis, we also have these communications, and we can even make a survey on this aspect in order to facilitate some kind of work on this, and we would do it with pleasure, and we collaborate with different institutions in order to have these practices and facts and figures about some aspects in local and regional communities.
Great. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for some great interventions. How about a round of applause for our panelists? So now we're going to move on to concluding remarks from the European Commission. I would like to welcome up here to the podium Mikhail Mostravakos from the European Commission's DG for Research and Innovation, and Angelique Petritz from the European Commission's DG Home Department. So they'll be able to give us really the EU level picture here. They've been here all day listening attentively to everything that's been presented. Let's see, you're here, Angelique. You're here, Mikhail. Mikhail, let's start with you. What are your reactions to what we've heard today, and how the European Commission is involved here?
Right, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. It was a very interesting conference, lots of insights, lot food for thought, many interesting actions which I wasn't aware about. So in all, a big hand to all of you. For me, it was really, really important to be here. I work in the Directorate General that designs and implements the Horizon programs, the EU programs for research and innovation. When I see our spending on the different research migration files since 2015, after the migratory crisis of the time, I would say more than 50-60% of the total budget has been allocated to integration research. So of a total amount of more than 150 million, more than half is allocated there. So clearly we deem that integration is key to solving different issues about migrant populations. Just to give you an example, if you achieve integration, you also solve all the health problems of migration populations, and this is coming up in our research where we see that you don't have to do specific research on health and migration, but really if you achieve integration, then you get to solve a series of subsequent issues, and this is just an example. This applies to everything. So for sure this is an area where we will continue to emphasize on. What is crucial for us is, on the one hand, to have this beauty of Horizon conferences, spaces, research, where we can all reflect on what is integration, go deeper, expand our concepts. This is important. What is also important is that when we arrive to policy recommendations, we are able to implement them. For us, this is key, to really go from research to policy. It's what keeps us up at night, if I may say so. It's not so easy to solve. It's more easily said than done because of many reasons. For example, the timelines from the academia are so different when you see the timelines of policy making, especially migration, where often it's reacting to situation rather than. So it's crucial to produce policy recommendations, and I'll open brackets here. You see in all Horizon topics that we always ask for policy recommendations because this is key. We never say what kind of policy recommendations we want. I mean, they are so ideologically charged that anyone can, recommend either directions and be valid, let's say. What makes a difference is to underpin the recommendations with evidence. So this is what counts, and this is what then we can convey to our political masters. So this is on a general comment. I would like to say a few words on the toolkit because I had a quick look at it and I have some notes taken. I think the explicit framing of integration as a process of community making within specific local context, especially in smaller municipalities and rural areas, is a novelty in this toolbox. The tailored strategies that acknowledge the distinct socioeconomic fabrics, and the practical tools for self-evaluation. The impact of COVID, this was important in the critical sectors of tourism and agriculture. And so I think when you read the toolbox, it's important. I was trying to imagine yesterday in my mind, how would it be like for a researcher to go with this toolbox in the office of a graphy mayor and try to, say that we have something for you that it could work. And then, so I was playing in my mind the dialogue. I have even taken some notes of it. But I think this is the key, because the reality is that you don't always have time to pitch your idea, to promote your work, which is, throughout 3 years, a lot of surveys, a lot of money behind it, and then you have only minutes to persuade someone that it's worth taking a shot at it. So you go to the mayor's office and you hold your toolbox, and the mayor asks you, we're getting just fine without it. Why do we need your fancy research? And then they ask you to speak plain, and can you speak in plain words? What is it about without putting me into sleep? And so I thought that if I were in such a meeting, I would say to the mayor, imagine your city as a big family where you have new members joining, right? So if we welcome them properly, they can help us grow stronger together. And the toolbox gives us the tools to do just that. The toolbox, this toolbox, and it can help us make a plan. Yeah, it's like having a recipe for a delicious dish, but you wouldn't just throw the ingredients together and hope for the best. So inside this toolbox, there are ideas that can help us transform the city, can help you transform the city with vocational education, vocational training programs, for example. And this, then can resonate with the mayor that this could, help your economy, or, we can create community events, and, in this way people will feel less strangers in their own town, and then maybe you have the attention on the mayor saying, I've seen some of us keeping it to themselves, so it's good if they're connected. And so from there, I think it's important to be able, to advocate for your work and really put it into practice. Now I heard that you are looking for opportunities to pilot it. I would be very interested to see how this plays out, and and then based on the results, to take it up. So these were my thoughts based on what I've heard, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Michael. So now we've heard the research perspective. Let's go to the migration policy perspective. Angelique, let's hear your thoughts.
Thank you. Do I have 5 minutes? Do I have 5 minutes? Thank you. So thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today. I got very inspired by many things I heard. So some things I'd like to take with me today and also discuss with the colleagues is that integration, we can speak also of minor integration, which I see it as a progressive integration. And we know very well that integration doesn't happen in one day, doesn't happen in 1 week, doesn't happen in 1 year. It can happen over generations. And I think this matches very well this concept. I also learned that we should broaden the term of integration and inclusion to speak of impact, to include impact. And I think that's very important. And the two-way integration, because we always speak of two-way integration, finally, maybe not two-way integration, maybe it's multiple-way integration because we have more than 2 groups. I liked very much this. And also I like this term of emplacement that I hadn't heard before. And I think it's very important to speak about rebuilding and communities, about merging communities instead about integrating one into the other. So I think I'll leave quite inspired from this conference. I go now to more precise and day-to-day stuff. I was delighted to hear that our action plan on integration and inclusion is a good plan. I'm very convinced it's a good plan, but it's nice to hear from other people as well, because we've been working on it for several years. It's from 21 to 27. We are now midway our action plan, and now I'll make a parenthesis, which is not a parenthesis because it's very important. We're doing a midterm review of the action plan, and we have a website which is called European Website on Integration, and there you find a questionnaire which is open to everybody. You can fill it in. It's until the 24th of May, if I'm not mistaken, the deadline. So we encourage as many stakeholders as possible to fill this questionnaire because that will feed in our midterm report. So the action plan has 4 pillars, 4 thematic areas, which are completely interlinked. And some of them we heard already today, like access to housing, which seems a major problem, access to the labor market, access to health, and access to education. And they're all interlinked because you cannot, it was said earlier, how can you find a job if you don't have a house? How can you be healthy if you don't have a house? If you're not healthy, how can you study? How can you find a job? So all this is completely interlinked. But on top of these thematic areas, we also have horizontal areas. And one very important horizontal area is the multi-stakeholder approach. Because integration you don't integrate to a state, to a country. You integrate to a local community, not even to a city. It's much, much smaller than that. So we need, in order to achieve successful integration, we need on board to have everybody, to have the national authorities, which are, on the Commission side, they're our official partners, because we discuss with member states, we fund member states, but member states is not enough. So we need to have the local and regional authorities, we need to have the NGOs, the private sector, the migrants themselves, the local communities. We need everybody on board, and everybody has to play a different role. So how can we achieve this? Because integration is a national competence, sometimes regional, depends on the member state. But it's not a European competence. So we try to create these networks. So we have a network for the member states, the European Integration Network, where we have the official authorities of the member states dealing with integration. But we also have another network, which is called the Urban Agenda Partnership. And this is what reflects, mirrors this multi-stakeholder approach. Because in the Urban Agenda Partnership, we have national authorities, but we have regional, we have cities, small cities, bigger cities, we have NGOs, we have European institutions, other authorities, etc. So we have the migrants themselves are represented there. So we have, reflects, let's say, in a small microcosm, this multi-stakeholder approach. So it was mentioned in the recommendations how to reach out to the small and medium-sized cities. You know, there are so many, it's true. How, on the European side, I mean, we are a team in integration, we're 4 people. I mean, how can we reach out to all these cities out there? So we need networks. And this is how we work. I mean, in the urban agenda, we have also many networks. Eurocities are there. I would like to mention a very important partnership with the Committee of the Regions. And this is why we were here today. We've done events together. We work very closely together. It's a very important partner for us. But the Committee of the Regions is also a member of the Urban Agenda, as is Eurocities, as is CMR, as is AER, Association of European Regions, etc. So there are several networks, and we rely on these networks for dissemination. Integration is a two-way approach, but cities themselves should also come our way, should also inform themselves of what is happening on the European level. In the Urban Agenda Partnership, we opened up, we had last summer, we published a new call for members. We had about 50 applications. We accepted all local and regional authorities who applied. So from cities, let's say small or medium-sized cities, we have Fuenlabrada from Spain, we have Mechelen in Belgium, we have Prato from Italy, and we have Timișoara. So Timișoara, I'm not sure if it qualifies as small or medium-sized. So why don't other cities haven't applied to be member of the partnership? That's a question. The networks disseminated all this information. It was published on the website for months. So it's also on the cities, and we see, I mean, for instance, I take an example of Fuenlabrada. Fuenlabrada was in an AMIF project. So they are already in the network, so they learn about, so they keep looking what's happening. So the urban agenda is quite important because we exchange best practices, because we have different actions, and the cities, the members come up with what they need. So we shape these actions on their real needs. So that's very important. It's a very practical thing, the urban agenda. It's not only talking and exchanging, it's also doing things and coming up with recommendations about policies. So I give you an example. For instance, one actions of the previous partnership was about the LGBTQI migrants. So we had study visits in Berlin, in Amsterdam, then we had an expert meeting in Mechelen, how to approach this issue. We saw good practices. Very good practices, for instance, in Berlin and Amsterdam, not to mix migrants, not to mix the LGBTQI community with other migrants, because they can be victims of violence, etc. So we came up with policy recommendations. Flanders is now implementing this. So very, 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 just an example, very, very concrete things. So I'm very hopeful that in the new version of the urban agenda, we're now finalizing the contract for the secretariat. It will start in the autumn. So I'm very hopeful that we'll do even more there, and with the participation of more cities. The last point I would like to raise, to reply in the terms of the recommendations, was about funding, because we hear a lot about funding, and I know it's not easy. But it's not only AMIF which funds integration. There are also other European funds. It was mentioned before, one example, the ESF+, European Social Fund. We have also the regional fund, ERDF, from DG Regio. So different aspects of integration can be funded by different funds. It's not only AMIF. And in 2021, we have published a toolkit on the website, on our website on integration, about how you can navigate between these different funds and to find the one which is better suited to respond to the needs. And also about local and regional authorities, because we get the complaint very often that, the money doesn't reach us. They go to the national authorities and then we don't get the funding we need in order to implement the projects. And of course, sometimes it's very politicized. It was mentioned before, the city and the national government belonging to different parties, so they don't support each other. So this makes the process even more complex. So we have some measures, some incentives for the member states to involve more local and regional authorities. For instance, they get more funding, they get a better match, they get 90% of the matching instead of 75% of the matching if they include in the project's national or local and regional authorities, for instance. And in the transnational projects that we manage on the Commission level, we have many projects where we have local regional authorities participating, and also cities about volunteering. I'll mention Include Cities, I'll mention Orientate, where it's about budding, but about mentoring between cities as well. So in that sense, we try to encourage cities participating. And in 2023 call, we had 8 million on a specific topic about integration on the local level. So this is our, let's say, the small steps we can have on our side, how to involve more cities and how to encourage more cities to participate. And my last point is about the pact, because it was mentioned and because it's a big thing and it was just, approved by the Council, so I cannot, not speak about the pact, even in 2 sentences, that the good thing about the pact, from the integration point of view, is that integration, as Mihaly said, is part of the pact. Is part of the pact, which means that the member states will have to integrate, and will have to integrate very early, because it also touches the reception directive, where about early integration measures. So there they will have, member states will have to provide language courses, civic integration to migrants from the start, and integration to labour market, access to the labour market from 6 months. Not 9 months, that is now. So there are some important steps in the pact, and where we hope that, integration will gain more visibility. And I was happy to hear about the action plan, but I was unhappy to hear that not many people know about the action plan. They know about Frontex, but not about the action plan. And I hope that the pact will help give more visibility to this action plan, because thank you for saying it, and that it's a good action plan. And if we are all together around it, I think we can make a big difference. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Michaela and Angelique. How about a round of applause for our Commission representatives? So we heard a lot of consistent themes today, and I think you both did an excellent job of summing up what we've heard. I wanted to close with just one particular thing that stuck out to me that was said today, which is that the longer that people feel that things aren't moving, that things aren't being solved, you're getting long-term disillusionment on both sides, which I thought was an interesting point, that both in terms of local populations and in terms of migrants, when there's no policy solutions, when nothing is moving and things go on in years and years, you're getting more of a feeling of hopelessness from people on both sides about even the potential for successful integration. So I think what we've heard today are some really great ideas about how to make these things happen, how to translate research into policy actions that can really make a difference, and hopefully you all feel energized and inspired by what we've heard today to really make things happen. So now we move on to the networking lunch. You can find that just outside these doors. If you go outside, turn right, you'll find the room with the lunch there. I hope you guys learned a lot today. I know I certainly did, and I wish you an excellent rest of your day.